What is the worst adult temper tantrum you have seen? One I mostly saw the aftermath of, but I heard a lot of banging and yelling as I and several coworkers at a small company rushed to the front office to see what was going on. It turned out two women had gotten into a full throwing stuff at each other fight, including their chairs. All because one had started a diet and the other had a candy jar on her desk. The other one I saw when I was a kid, and it was a full bout of batshit insane. After a girls softball tournament, one of the parents had a freak out while first and second place teams were lined up and receiving their trophies. My sister was on one of the teams. She ranted, screamed, yelled at the umpires, accused them of fixing the game, threw equipment around, threw dirt, stopped just short of assault, and the umpires and coaches mainly let her rant, even when she was screaming in their faces. Her daughter was standing there, holding her second place trophy, in tears. Finally this woman yelled at her daughter to come on. They were leaving. The daughter clearly wanted to stay, but the lady kept screaming, so the daughter stepped away from the team and walked toward her. The woman tore the trophy away from her daughter's hands and threw it on the ground, the two of them heading off into the parking lot. I felt horrible for the girl, and it was one of the first times I realized a lot of adults suck. I was driving down a street in Portland following about 5 car lengths behind a small pickup truck. The driver of that pickup started slamming his brakes on for no apparent reason. He kept doing it until he actually slammed them so hard that he slid to a complete stop in the middle of traffic. I was forced to stop behind him and was sitting there wondering if he had something wrong with his truck when he got out in a fury and ran back to my truck red-faced and screaming at me that I was tailgating him. I was completely baffled by this guy. I never tailgate people, and I was a generous 5 car lengths behind him on the road. He completely lost his mind and was screaming so high-pitched and senseless that I could no longer understand anything that was coming out of his mouth. I really thought there was something mentally wrong with him, so I rolled my window down and said, "Take a deep breath, man. You're going to have a heart attack." That just made him go more crazy. I've never heard a human voice make such crazy sounds. I wish I had a video camera. So after a minute or so I just pulled over on a side street to try to make sense of everything and let traffic go. He stood right there in the street and screamed and wailed his arms all over for 4 more minutes as cars went around him. As I was sitting there, a car pulled over in front of me and a guy got out, walked over to my car and said, "Did that guy slam the brakes on in front of you?" I said, "Yeah, I have no idea what's wrong with him." The guy says, "He's done it to me twice, and I've called the police on him both times." I just called them right now. So both of us sat there until the police arrived, about 2 more minutes, with the guy screaming and throwing a temper tantrum the entire time. The cops had to tase the guy to get him to stop his tantrum. He got arrested, and his truck got towed. It was a bizarre and terrible experience. One of the cops told me they had received over 50 calls on the guy, and they had arrested him 5 times already. Edit. The guy's license had already been revoked. He was driving anyway. It would have been nice if having a revoked license would have kept him from driving. TLDR, a mentally unstable guy slammed his brakes on in the middle of traffic and proceeded to throw a temper tantrum in the middle of the road because I was following 5 car lengths behind him, and to him, I was tailgating him. He ended up getting himself tased and arrested. I used to work at Logan Airport during the whole liquid ban. I told some guy he couldn't bring his soda through security. He proceeds to go on a giant tirade against government interference and that I was somehow personally responsible for taking all his freedoms away. He then proceeded to yell that he had a bomb. He was swiftly tackled. Edit. Holy crap. I woke up this morning to my inbox on fire. To clarify a few things, I didn't work for that sap, so stop calling me shitty names. I worked checking people in for United. This guy started heading towards security with his soda, so I reminded him that he couldn't bring it through and that security would take it away. That's when the whole thing started, and he was tackled by the soldiers we had patrolling at that time. Also, I would like to thank everyone for the tiny dinosaurs. It's a lovely thing to wake up to. This is the only time I've had to walk away from a customer in order to keep my calm and not get fired. I work at a certain video game retailer, and I had a lady try to trade in a PS3 that had pieces chipped off, a large crack in the case, smelled like a cat had used it as a litter box, and had both thumbsticks on the controller, chewed through to the little plastic nubs. Well, when I told her I had to put a refurb fee on the system, since I couldn't sell it as is, she flipped out on me, cursing up a storm, and calling me a thief for 20 minutes before the manager had to get involved. I even tried to reason with her through asking if she would be happy if I had sold her that particular system, and she screamed at me that no, she wouldn't, but that isn't her problem, and that she is going to get the full value out of her system. It was so bad her own daughter came up to me afterwards and apologized for how her mother acted. Oh, and the lady got her way eventually by having the manager discount the PS4 she was purchasing by the amount of the fee. Edit. Just wanted to spread a bit more light. The manager didn't intervene earlier because he was on break, and he is a fantastic manager. It was one of those situations where the customer would have escalated to the district manager and then would have gotten her way anyway, so the manager went ahead and put a discount on the transaction. He did, however, get back at her by throwing a few things in that she didn't really need, including a few things she absolutely couldn't return, and got nearly a $1,000 sale out of her. Which still boggles my mind that she spent that much and was pissed about losing $30. At my workplace we had to call the police because two women got into a fist fight in an elevator. It had apparently started because woman A was talking on the phone and woman B didn't like that very much. So naturally woman B decided the correct course of action was to start punching and hair pulling. There was quite a bit of blood when they were finally pulled apart. What made it sadder was that woman A had her daughter with her. Poor little girl was inconsolable and crying her eyes out, she was so scared. Edit. So for some reason people tried to zone in on the races of these two women. All I'm going to say is the races and the roles they played in the situation are not what you all are assuming. Edit 2. I should also specify that I'm not entirely certain the call was still taking place on the elevator. That's just where the altercation took place. But if it did, I work in a small building with only 3 floors. As long as you aren't in the basement and have a decent cell phone provider, service isn't too bad as you tend to be in and out pretty quickly. I work in retail. I was working as a cashier that day, and you know the general format for a lot of express queues? Everyone gets in one line, and when a cashier is free a little light flashes and an electronic voice tells you which number to go to. That's how our only tills are set up. A lot of people try to come in through the exit side of the tills, sometimes just an honest mistake, and sometimes trying to skip the line. Had a guy come in when we had a decent linoop, and he went in through the wrong way and walked right up to my till. I gestured to the linoop of peoples and asked him to go to the line as the other people were there first. Note that I wasn't rude to him, I just asked him to go to the linoop. This man then decided to yell and scream the following points. There were 3 cashiers. We were a bit short-staffed. Surely one of us could ring him through. I was clearly lying about there being other customers lined up. Even though he looked right at them, I was giving terrible customer service. He then began to demand to see a manager to complain about me. I paged one up and told him one would be with him in a minute. He literally waited about 5 seconds before screaming, "I don't have time for this. Thanks for your manager's attention. You guys obviously don't care," and stormed out. Gotta love working in retail. Edit. I won't say what store this is, since I still work there and like posting on r/Talis from retail. However, a few people are pretty close. Edit #2. Okay, since people are still asking, I'll throw a bone. I'm Canadian. The worst was definitely from a man when I worked for an auto parts store. The parts often have lifetime warranties, and all we needed was some info, and we could replace it up to the day you junked the car or died, whichever came first. I asked the gentleman for some info, phone number and name, and he refused. I explained that without it, I couldn't give him his lifetime warranty, and he lost his sheet. I mean, he turned this violet color, vein pulsing in his fat forehead, yelling and screaming at me. I can't even remember what he was saying, because I just stared incredulously at him as he ranted and raved like a madman, threatening me, thrusting his grubby finger in my face. I seriously thought he was going to reach over the counter and try to kill me because he sure looked like he was going to. My manager came running up and tried to intervene, and he just kept on spewing his angry rant and everyone else in the entire store had fallen silent. My manager kept saying, "Sir, if you keep this up I'm gonna have to ask you to leave." But the customer wasn't listening and screamed over him. Eventually, after at least 5 minutes of this insanity, the other customers revolted against him. One man, a mechanic who was a regular, eventually stepped right up to the guy and said, "I'm a mechanic, and you're wasting my time because this young lady asked you for information. Get out of the store. You are costing me money by standing here. Get the fuck out." The angry customer yelled back at him, saying he'd beat the shit out of him and they could take it outside, etc. Another customer shouted at the aggressor, telling the guy to get out multiple times until the man finally threw his items to the floor and left. As he was walking out, I began ringing out the mechanic who had yelled at him and asked if he had a rewards card, to which he replied, "Yes, and I will give you my phone number," as loud as he possibly could. TLDR, got yelled at and threatened by a sheethead. Lovely mechanics came to my rescue. I used to work for a coffee shop that was always busy. I mean, like there was a constant line out the door. I had a man completely skip the line of about 10 to 12 people waiting, grab a juice out of our fridge, and come up to me single-handedly ringing everyone through. He cut off the next person and put the drink down and started pulling money out of his wallet, and I told him I wouldn't ring him through without standing in line first. There's a queue. You sit. He went from a general asshole, smug expression to enraged, red-faced, screaming at me, telling me that he was just buying a faking juice, not a coffee, to stop being such a faking stupid bitch and just ring him through. Berated me for being a barista, even though if I wasn't there he wouldn't be getting any service, and if I was even remotely smart I wouldn't be working here. So to just do my job like a good girl and ring him through, and then threw money at me. I didn't even remotely change my expression the whole time. His bills all fell on the floor in front of him. I pushed his juice aside and then motioned to the next person in line to order. He got so angry that he looked like a dumbass in front of so many people and didn't affect me. He grabbed a 1-pound bag of coffee beans off of our counter and threw it across the store, grabbed his bills off the floor and walked away, telling me that he would never come back and our business would fail. Last year my mom was pissed for a bunch of things and blew up on Christmas Eve, typical for most holidays. The main thing was that my mom was on some crazy diet and couldn't eat like 99% of the stuff despite sneaking food and bringing her own sheet. The next morning my sister, dad and I decided to not let it ruin the holiday and started passing out the presents between the four of us. My mom came downstairs and wouldn't talk to any of us. She finally came into the family room and we pointed out her chair, which had the presents from us, to her. She walked over, placed her cereal down, and started chucking all of her presents at the floor, wall, cats, whatever was around. Screamed that they were all shit. She knew even without opening them that we should still open our presents, that the presents from her were the only ones keeping, that we didn't deserve even shitty presents, on and on. I don't like my mom. Edit. Wow. Thanks everyone. My mom is actually diagnosed bipolar. She doesn't believe she is, and I'm fairly sure she also has narcissistic personality disorder, although obviously there's no way of getting her tested. She was 59 at the time, and she went through menopause extremely early, so no, she wasn't just cranky from that. Also yes, I'm aware cereal is not healthy. I wasn't gonna tell my mom, lol. Her diet was mainly because she needed heart surgery and thought she could fix the damage herself in like 6 months. My parents are separated, and my dad really only stayed with my mom for the last 20 years, so that my sister and I would turn out okay. Sorry to hear about other people also having parents, but it does feel a little good knowing we're not alone. Edit 2. Yes, my mom having BP makes her mood swings not her fault. However, she is basically always this amount of hurtful all the time. Her mood is really the only thing that changes. She'll tell me I'm worthless just as quickly when she's happy as when she's screaming. Also, yes, my dad could still have been a good parent if they had divorced, but you're assuming my mother is capable of being reasonable. She would have lied through her teeth to make sure my sister and I never saw my dad, and she often threatened to. She even had my dad arrested before. My dad physically removed my sister and I from my mother multiple times and stopped some of her worst rages. Thank you for your insight and personal experiences. I found the best way for me personally to handle my mom is a mixture of grey rocking and avoidance/LC. Edit 3. Thank you to everyone suggesting I check out /r/Ray said bin assists. I actually found it a couple months ago, and it is super helpful. Edit 4. Super sorry to have offended anyone by my misuse of the acronym BPD. I meant BD. My mother has never been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. She has been diagnosed by 2 different doctors with bipolar disorder, prescribed multiple medications, but never taken any. I suspect she had narcissistic personality disorder, although she has not been officially diagnosed, and would probably have a worse temper tantrum if I suggested she get evaluated. Guy bought tickets to a movie and the theater had reserved seating. When you buy the tickets, you choose a seat. The seat number is printed on the ticket. He decides he doesn't like the seats he's chosen, so he goes and sits somewhere else. Problem is though, the seats were sold to someone else, and they came in and asked him to move. The guy refused. They call us in, the managers, and the guy throws a massive temper tantrum in the middle of the theater, complaining, bitching, and whining about why he can't just stay there. We explained to him multiple times about the reserved seating, and he wasn't having any of it. We had to call the cops to get him out because he was screaming at the managers and threatening to fight other people in the theater because they were telling him to GTFO. When the police came in to remove the guy, the entire theater applauded. Probably one of the most ridiculous things I've dealt with. I work at a golf shop that also has a large driving range for customers to try out product and hit balls. We sell tokens or punch cards for the range. The punch cards are sold for 25 or 50 tokens. So, we have a guy that comes in with his son, somewhere between 10 and 12, with his half-used 50 token punch card. This is a synopsis of what I overheard between the customer, C, and one of our assistant managers, B. C. Hi, so we are moving out of town, and I was wondering if we could get our money back for the rest of these tokens. B. Well, I'm sorry sir, but the punch cards are non-refundable. You could give them to a friend or family member. C. What do you mean I can't return this? I bought it. Can't you give me store credit or something? B. Repeats earlier statement. If it weren't used I would gladly return it. C. This is faking ridiculous. I've already given you guys the money, so why can't you just put it on my account? B. Can you relate to anything that I'm saying? C. No, I don't understand. B. It's like if you bought an airline ticket and you missed your flight. The airline isn't going to refund your ticket when it was your mistake. Basically my coworker repeated the same things for like 10 minutes to this guy while he's setting a terrible example for his kid and being obnoxiously loud. Literally the whole store was watching. Eventually one of the guys in corporate made my coworker give him the store credit. What's the point of store policies if we don't enforce them? TLDR, a customer got mad. In my mid-20s, I was living in a pretty big house and splitting the rent with 5 other people. We had a communal kitchen, but the vegans, 3 of them, kept their pans and utensils separate. No problem. And then I bought a blender. A month or so goes by, and one of my vegan roommates started a macrobiotic thing that I never fully understood, but involved a lot of blending. Lentils. In the blender. Parsnips and spinach. In the blender. Blackberries. Tofu. Beans and rice. In the blender. Everything he ate was room temperature paste from the blender. I was completely cool with that. I put it in the kitchen for the household to use, myself included. There was one reason I bought that blender, and one reason only. Peanut butter banana smoothies. I fucking love peanut butter banana smoothies. You peel a bunch of bananas, put them in the freezer, pull one out later, and stick it in a blender with some peanut butter and some milk, faking perfection. I knew the blender was getting some heavy vegan mileage, so being the kind-hearted conscientious bitch that I am, I used soy milk. No problem. I was at the point of switching on the blender when my aforementioned roommate ambled into the kitchen, obviously hell-bent on another paste feed. He locked eyes with me. I saw panic rising in his face. "Don't worry, it's soy milk," I said, thinking the matter quickly resolved. The panic remained. It grew. His eyes widened, and both of his hands rose in unison to grip fistfuls of hair at his temples, elbows akimbo. "What the fuck are you doing?" he bellowed, knuckles white, hair follicles at their last extremity. "I'm making a smoothie, buddy. What's up?" Hands still buried in his hair, pulling at the temples, elbows pointed out at the walls. My roommate achieved a physical feat I have only ever witnessed in cartoons. He leapt into the air, both legs raising simultaneously, knees spread to the side, nearly reaching his chest repeatedly, with both of his feet timed to punctuate the words that followed. "You can't put bananas in the blender." Around the BL in blender, he slipped but completed the word before he landed hard. He maintained eye contact with me through the whole ordeal until the fall. While on the floor he regained eye contact and began raving incoherently about enzymes while pulling yams out of his grocery bag and tossing them around on the floor. I turned the blender on and made my smoothie. When I was done, he had gone to his room with his yams. Edit. A lot of you are asking about the bananas and why they couldn't go in the blender. I'm still asking too, but not because my roommate didn't explain his reasons to me. I would just zone out after a while when he talked about food. I remember that eating the pasted food had something to do with the process of chewing and the production of gastric juices. All I can recall about the bananas is that enzymes were involved that would break down some other quality of his food. Amino acids, maybe. He was dabbling with Krishna consciousness at the time, so maybe they have an anti-banana outlook. He also thought melons were very bad for you and once threw away an entire sack of my potatoes because a couple of them had a green cast to the skin, making them a neurotoxin. I used to work at an answering service, which is like your typical call center, except people call you thinking you work for the company they are trying to reach, and then you take a message and hopefully dispatch it to the intended person. We had to follow our clients' rules, which meant many callers didn't get what they wanted. Among our clients were a regional government office, medical care companies, the local electrical company, lawyers, accountants, real estate agencies, contractors and more. I'm having a hard time picking the worst adult temper tantrum because there were so many. A sample platter. A man whose power went out shortly before his Super Bowl party was starting. Winter storm at the time. Repair crews were frantically trying to locate the problem in spite of the weather, and we had no heater to give anyone. The guy was shouting so loudly he probably bled from his mouth afterwards because he had a bunch of friends coming over soon and just bought a new big TV and blah blah blah. He didn't accept the fact that we had no heater and wound up demanding that I personally head out to the area where he lived and fix the problem, even though I was a phone jockey with no electrical training, no car, and who was physically in another city as whole. Shout at God, not me. I had another power related call another time. It was an Indian woman whose power was cut off because she didn't pay her bills. She demanded the power be restored because she had children at home, yet adamantly refused to pay her overdue bills first with no justification. The guy on call for the power company was firm about their policy, pay or no service. She kept calling back, and we eventually got a hold of the on-call guy again in desperation. He laughed at the woman, then told us we could hang up on her / whatever. We followed our own policy by having a supervisor warn her that we'd hang up if she kept calling to harass us. She kept calling, and we'd hang up as soon as we heard her voice. She eventually just called and screamed into the phone. It wasn't even words, just awe. It took over an hour for her to give up and stop calling. A man living in an upper middle class neighborhood called the regional government on a Sunday at 2 a.m., my night shift at the time, to rant about how his garbage hadn't been collected on time the previous Tuesday morning. We had to be extremely diplomatic about all calls for the region because we were trusted to represent the government during off hours. We had very clear sets of instructions to follow that covered all cases, including angry people calling about garbage. We would take a message and promise it would be reviewed by government staff first thing in the morning. The messages were always reviewed, so this wasn't just a thing they said to appease people. Anyway, this well-to-do man who decided 2 a.m. on a Sunday was the perfect time to demand restitution for a week-old offense decided to call and harass me. Note that he told me he hadn't called previously. When I asked, he demanded I put the regional supervisor on the phone. Not happening. Demanded I send a garbage truck out to his house that instant to collect next week's garbage. Not within my power. Also, ridiculous. And finally started bragging about how much money he made, how nice the place he lived in was, and how my shitty low-class job meant I too was a piece of shit. I was eventually forced to put him on hold and contact our emergency on-call person because I had no idea what to do. Wasn't allowed to hang up, and they said it was okay to hang up and ignore calls from him the rest of the night, so long as I notated when he called. I was also instructed to warn the guy that his calls were being recorded and that government staff would listen to the recording of his abuse the next morning. I hope that guy choked on a fishbone. I didn't see this one personally, but my father told me about it. He travels a lot and is on planes all the time, and one time, not long after he landed, there was a huge storm and so everyone was grounded at the airport for the next several hours. Well, as soon as he and all the passengers got off the plane, one of the passengers didn't feel like the all planes are grounded until further notice applied to him, so he strode right up to the flight attendant, gate woman, and started screaming at her. Just laying into her that this whole situation was an outrage, and it was her fault and he's never flying this airline again, and blah blah blah. And she just takes it. Doesn't say a word. Finally, he ends his tirade and stomps down the terminal, and my dad and most of the other passengers are still there, and she just watches him go. Watches him until he turns the corner, and as soon as he's out of view the attendant leans into her little microphone and says, "Everyone, please gather round so I can hand out your free meal and room vouchers. We are so sorry for the inconvenience, but we thank you for your patience." And he says that's when he learned that you never piss off the gatekeepers, your flight attendants, your gate guards, your whoever. They have the power to keep you from getting where you need to go. TLDR guy throws a temper tantrum at a flight attendant, is immediately served karmic justice by said attendant. A guy, his wife, and a baby come into the restaurant I was working in. They order 2 Don Julio margaritas. Okay, no problem boss. They order 2 more. Their server has to leave for the day, so they transfer the table to another server, and at that point they order the $1 special margaritas. Sure. Check time comes, and they say they never ordered the Don Julio ones. Their server informed me, before she left for the day, that they kind of rubbed her the wrong way and to keep an eye on them. That server speak for this guy's gonna be a problem, giving you a heads up. I call her and ask her how he ordered the margaritas. She confirmed he specified, etc. So I told the guy he had to pay for them. I was the bartender and a mod. He didn't like that, so he threw down a $100 bill and I walked away to get his change. When I came back he was cussing me out, called me a bitch, yelled to the entire restaurant that we were ripping him off. His wife picked up the baby and called me a bitch. He called me a prison guard, and I told them to please leave the premises. He called back later and said I was rude, cursed him out, that he was a doctor, and that he was going to sue me. Still waiting to get called into court on that one. TLDR, grown-as man gets ousted by a 5-foot-tall bartender, but with calm composure instead of fisticuffs. I used to work at a liquor store in the state of Georgia. In our specific county we are not legally allowed to have a public restroom, liquor stores only. We get a lot of customers in that ask if we have a restroom, but have to turn them away. No big deal. Most of the customers understand and quickly head to the pharmacy next door to use the restroom. Except for this one terrible lady. When she asked to use our restroom I gave her the normal sorry, but it is against state county law to have a public restroom, expecting her to be a civil human being. Wrong. She proceeded to scream at me, using a bunch of racial slurs. I'm not white, though I'm born and raised in the US, and intentionally broke a bottle of alcohol in front of the register. Then she stormed out. After cleaning up the mess she made, I noticed a new post on the store's Facebook. It is from the same lady saying that she will never shop at the store again, was treated horribly, etc. I'll always remember that tantrum. because it was the first time I was made to feel like a lesser human simply because of my race. I work hotel front desk. I have a ton of stories, but here's a few of the more memorable ones. A guest committed suicide in one of our rooms, and for various reasons we cancelled the manager's reception we usually held that evening. It was disrespectful, the managers were otherwise occupied, etc. Anyway, one special snowflake guest came down to the desk the next morning absolutely livid. She was upset her children had to witness police activity at the hotel. She was upset the manager's reception, aka free beer and wine, had been cancelled and demanded a refund for a free amenity. She also was upset that we would not comp her entire stay for everything she endured. Frankly, we were all shaken by the guest's suicide and refused to give the snowflake anything. Q stomping her feet and throwing a water bottle at the front desk agent trying to help her. She did all this in front of her children. Mid-level manager for a large healthcare company demanded an upgrade to a suite because don't you know who I am? In front of the Beach Boys, who were checking in during their tour and had reserved the suite in question. Dance convention. Had a dance mom upset we wouldn't give her a late checkout on the last day of the convention. Checkout is noon. She wanted 5 p.m. We were like, we can do 12:30. She had her daughter come to the desk and beg us, with tears in her eyes, for a late checkout. When that didn't work, she screamed "Yad alarm off the faking racists" in the middle of our crowded lobby, full of children. The agent helping her was Hispanic, and the manager was black. Not seen but heard of. My boyfriend's brother is getting a free ride through university, since their grandparents had paid for my BF's education, and would do the same for his brother. He screamed and threw a tantrum about not having enough money for residency, since he wanted to leave their mom's house, how he wanted his independence, and that he needed the money, or he was going to quit school. His grandparents caved, since it seemed super important that he have the money he was asking for, and his selfish brother spent it on a $5,000 trip to the Dominican, paid for his girlfriend's ticket and expenses, blew all of the money he had been given. Turns out he lied that he needed the money, wasn't even remotely considering moving out of his mom's house, and only wanted money he could spend on his own terms. Now he's slowly stirring up the pot again, complaining about how apparently broke he is, and the new lie is how he's in jeopardy of not paying for his tuition. Education is seen as a must in their family. His grandparents are sticklers and think if you don't have a degree you're worth nothing. So they fall into this trap repeatedly because they think he'll become a homeless meth head if they let him fail and learn the valuable lesson of not taking advantage of people. I work at a hotel. About a year ago we closed for a couple months due to major renovations. The day before we closed I received a call from a lady wanting to make reservations for the upcoming week. Unfortunately, because of renovations and our temporary closure, I had to tell her that I wouldn't be able to accept her reservation, and I was very sorry, and I was about to recommend the property next door and give her the phone number, but instead, she started screaming at me. It's her and her husband's anniversary, and she was going to surprise him with a vacation, and I personally ruined their anniversary. As I tried to apologize again, she made the most snide, inappropriate remark I'll never forget. Why do I care if you're sorry? You still get paid and don't have to do anything. Lady, first of all, no, I didn't get laid off. Everyone else did, though except the GM and myself. One of us just had to be there to field off potential customers and advise them we are closed. We alternated times we came in and only had limited front desk hours for those 2 months. And second of all, it's not your business who's working and who got laid off. And third, I deal with weddings/anniversaries all the time. People plan these things well in advance, not the day before. Besides, even if we weren't undergoing, or about to, renovations there would have been no guarantee we would even had availability anyway. There were a million things I hated about being closed for the time we were, but the only good thing that came out of it was I didn't have to accommodate her. I used to work as an administrator for a preschool. At the end of the school year, we put on a graduation, mostly for a photo op/final reunion for the students and their families. We often used a vendor to order diploma/cap and gowns as one set that the parents pay for. One year, The father of one of our students lost his job and money was tight for their family. The mother asked that instead of paying for the diploma/cap and gown set, if she could make her own cap and gown for her daughter. The owner and I agreed as it was no skin off our backs, but we made it clear that the package came with the diploma, and if she made the cap and gown herself there would be no diploma. She agreed. So come the graduation and things go well. The director calls the names of all the kids and they come to get their diploma, and also a chance for their parents to take a picture of their kid with the director. All the kids get a diploma except for the girl of the aforementioned father and mother. Of course, the daughter doesn't care because she's 4, but her parents freak out. They question why their daughter didn't get a diploma, saying that she earned one and now she feels left out and not as special as the other kids. As I said, their daughter couldn't have cared less. But a few minutes into watching her parents scream, she starts to cry. Her parents assume the tears are from not being given a piece of paper certifying that she graduated from her optional step in education. They then accuse the director of being all about the money. Now, up until this point, the parents of the other children were being awkwardly silent, but they began to speak up here. They begin defending the director and giving examples about how much she has helped everyone financially. Finally, the family take their daughter, who is still crying, and leave, saying they'll never be back. About 3 months later, they come back looking for childcare for their second daughter. The director accepted their application. Edit: I don't think I made it too clear before, but the cap and gown/diploma set was optional. Parents have opted to have their child dress in a suit or a princess dress or something. It was never an issue before, because they all understood that the diploma only came with the cap and gown. I worked at Tower Records way back when a nicely dressed middle-aged woman came up to the register to ask about a CD that was supposed to come in. It was some obscure classical album. Obscure enough that she couldn't tell me the album title, the composer, the band, nothing. Our computers had to have at least one of those pieces of information to look up if it was in stock and where it would be located, or even if it was in stock at another one of our stores. Apparently, she'd gotten a stock transfer from another location, but couldn't remember which one. The way transfers worked, if another store in the region had it, it would show up as being in stock there. Once they pulled it, the receiving department would scan it, prep a shipping slip, and it would show as in stock at our location once our receiving department had received and scanned it, and then they'd call the customer to say it was in. Anyway, when she couldn't give me any info I needed to try to look it up, she started full on screaming at me for not helping her. I did the super polite "I'm so sorry I can't help you," while smiling as sincerely as possible retail spiel, and, as it does, it just enraged her. The more polite I was, the worse she got. I explained that I couldn't look up the CD for her without any info, but that I'd be more than happy to help her if she could remember the title, composer, or artist. Then she started stomping her feet while yelling at me. Finally, a bewildered customer came up to be wrung out, and Lady Stomp stormed off into the classical room. I called back to another employee that was in charge of our classical section and asked him if he'd mind helping her. If she hadn't been such an entitled asshole, I cold called the other store to check the status of any stock transfers coming to our store. Surprisingly, she came back to the register to apologize to me after cooling off in the classical room. Since she was playing nice, I went ahead and called the only other location in our state and found out that it was en route and told her we'd call her as soon as it came in. It was fascinating watching her cycle through civilized, screaming and stomping, apologetic, and then grateful. I like to think I used to do my part in training customers for the future generations of retail workers. I worked at a grocery store on Boylston Street during the Boston Marathon bombings. Store was closed for an entire week, as the street was considered a crime scene. The day before we reopened, we were then, and finally then, allowed to enter the store to get rid of the thousands and thousands of dollars of spoiled food, due to the store being shut and the power being cut. We had hardly any perishable food. We got some things from another store, I believe. Because, yeah, no, crime scene. Cue woman freaking out for far too long about us not having the salad she wanted. The pre-made Cheetos salad. yelling about us having poor customer service, about how we can't do our jobs, that we are obviously being overpaid for our lack of effort at our jobs. She told someone to go back to school. Cue my manager basically saying there were bombings a week ago. People died. Your salad is irrelevant. Woman goes red, obviously forgetting she was on the street of the crime scene, and we had a more than reasonable excuse for lack of products. Shamefully, woman leaves. Customers cheer. I was working at a really nice restaurant one Valentine's Day, waitressing, and this couple came in saying it was their anniversary. The woman was really nice and telling me all about how they had their first date at this restaurant and they come every year on Valentine's Day and order the exact same thing they had on their first date. They had some wine and cocktails, and when they went to order their special meal I went to go put in their order and chef told me we were out of the porterhouse steak. It was later into the night and they'd all been ordered already. I went back to the table to tell them I was sorry we were out of the steak, but if they'd like to order something else I'd give them each a free dessert. All of a sudden this woman went from being so sweet to total meltdown mode. She started crying, like sobbing, and she was shaking and stomping her feet. Then she stood up and started literally screaming saying that we ruined her anniversary and how could we do this to her on her special day blah blah. Then she started in on her husband calling him a piece of shit asshole for being late and started degrading him saying she wished she'd never married him anyway and what a terrible husband he was. We finally got her to calm down and order something else and I swear the whole rest of her meal she was just getting drunk and was switching between either crying with her head down on the table or snarling at her husband. It was the worst temper tantrum I've ever seen by a woman old enough to be my mom. Over a porterhouse steak lol, and I felt so bad for her husband. He seemed totally abused and miserable. The whole thing was just bizarre. I remember because it was one of the only times I cried in front of my dad. In my town, you had to be 13 to referee young U8 and U9 rec soccer, but since my brother had done it for so long they allowed me to take the referee class at 12, and I passed it after a 24-hour class. On my second day on the job, I was reffing a U8 rec game. The girls in this game had no coordination and the purpose was to get them accustomed to the rules and play style of soccer. Anyway, I apparently made a call a father of one of the girls disagreed with, and he started pestering me for the entirety of the game. After the game he kept berating me all the way into the parking lot while I, 12 years old, tried to be professional and keep my head down until I reached my dad's car. When I got into my car he kind of stopped and went to get his daughter. My dad, who happened to be the chief investigator for the Department of Criminal Justice in New Jersey, saw I was visibly shaken up and he asked me what was wrong. I just broke down, completely terrified over how a grown man just treated me. My dad got out of the car and chased him down. I couldn't see what happened from where I was in the passenger seat, but I heard my dad yell, then the jerk-off parent, then my dad again. Then I heard silence. My dad walked back to the car and said he'd never bother me again and was proud I was willing to take on a paying job so early in my life. My tears cleared up immediately. I've never been so happy to have such a bad as a dad, and I also learned a lesson on how to deal with narcissistic jerk-offs. I continued to ref another 7 years and worked my way up to where I was earning over $100 per game reffing tournaments with college scouts. I'm glad I stuck with it, but there are some parents out there who go on serious power trips over their children's sports. I'm glad my dad stood up for me that day or I'd have never learned how to stand up for myself later on. My freshman chemical 101 prof threw a temperature tantrum at the beginning of class once. We had just taken the last exam before the final, and a lot of people bombed it because he put a lot of information on there that wasn't covered in lecture or the textbook. Since it was near the end of the year, this was also the time all the profs were reminding everyone to review them on Rate My Professor. Many students, myself included, rated him badly because he tested us on info from physics and organic chemical in a 101 class. He also liked to make derogatory remarks and individually mock students in front of 300 other people. He was a major asshole. The first class after yes grades were released, he just lost it, calling us all entitled, lazy Winnie etc. Said none of us deserved to be in the university, one of the best in the state. We were worthless people who would amount to nothing in life, and that he would even try to contest some students' enrollment. He had a pretty loud voice and never used a mic, so he was screaming at the top of his lungs. Then we found out why he was so mad. His mom regularly checked his Rate My Professor page and called him the night before and asked, "What are you doing to those poor kids to make them say those things? Why do they hate you so much?" He was mad because his mom called him out on being a total sheet bag, and he decided to take it out on us. By the end of the year, he had said enough crap, specifically about disabled and mentally ill students, that many of us were thinking about reporting him and trying to get him fired. He ended up getting seriously reprimanded. He's only allowed to teach one class now. Sucks to be you, Doc Collins. You were a little whiny little beach. My mom. There's a lot of stories, but here's my favorite. Graduation ceremony of college. I had told my parents that I really didn't want to do it because I knew there would be hell to pay, but I conceded because, well, shit. They paid for it. So if they wanted some hullabaloo pomp and circumstance that made them feel good, they could have it. At the ceremony, I was seated away from my family, so I was unaware of the shit storm that was brewing in their general direction. According to my sister Rose, during the ceremony my mom was standing up in front of the audience so she could prepare to take photographs as I walked on stage. Rose asked her to sit down or move to the side because I was way back at the end of the line and she was blocking the view of all the other parents trying to take pictures of their own damn kids. After the ceremony, I could tell my sister was nonplussed, but I figured I'd hear the story later. And boy, did I. We decided to go to a pizza place to have lunch and celebrate. I drove my then boyfriend and my youngest sister, Heather, and my other sister Rose rode with my mom. Halfway to the pizza joint, my dad calls me and says that they will be turning around and driving back home, 2 hours away. When I asked why, I was met with some vague answer. I told him to get his butt over here and at the very least drop my sister off, since she was supposed to be staying the weekend with me. They got to the pizza place, and when my sister got out of the car, her face was bright red, and she had clearly been crying her eyes out. She would barely even talk. I told Heather to take my mom and dad and go inside the restaurant so I could talk to Rose one-on-one. Rose told me that, as soon as she got into the car with my mom and dad, my mom tore into her about the rude comments she had made during the graduation ceremony. She said that such a rude daughter didn't deserve to be called anything but it, and apparently my mom spent the car ride talking about her, like she wasn't there. It's so ungrateful, treating its own mother in such a way. What the fuck, right? I spent a good 20 minutes talking to Rose and telling her it wasn't her fault that we had such a shitty mom. At that point, my mom comes out of the restaurant and throws a plastic cup of water on the ground. She told Rose, "Get up and get inside and stop making a scene." I told her that she was the one making the scene and that she should go back inside. I expected a retort or worse, but she was sort of in a haze and walked back inside. Rose and I followed inside shortly afterwards, and I intended to make the damn lunch as short as humanly possible. At this point I didn't even want to stay, but they had already gotten a table. When I get into the restaurant, I go to the table and notice things are really weird. First of all, the restaurant was extremely busy, post-graduation celebrations, but the tables around ours were conspicuously empty. My dad, boyfriend, and Heather are sitting in dead silence and my mom is nowhere in sight. The waitress was very obviously avoiding the table. I learned this later, but apparently, after they were seated, my mom just kept talking about how she couldn't stand her ungrateful daughters and she wanted to go home. My boyfriend apparently told her that it would be nice if she would try to stay for my sake and celebrate my graduation. She was my daughter first, before you ever came along, she snapped at him. And then she started making howling, crying, wounded animal noises in the middle of the restaurant, throwing her head and arms down on the table. I guess that's when she decided to walk outside to throw a plastic cup on the sidewalk. The poor waitress quickly reseated some equally unfortunate guests adjacent to our table. So I'm sitting there, not knowing what the fuck happened, and I see my mom stumble out of the bathroom and walk outside to the parking lot. She's pretty unstable, so I followed her to make sure she didn't drive off in a bad state. She got into the car, and I got in on the passenger's side. At first she didn't say anything, and just stared out the window. Then bam, just started howling and slamming her head into the steering wheel. I put my hand between her head and wheel, to get her to stop. She tells me about how Rose asked her to sit down, or move aside, because she was blocking everyone else's view during the ceremony. And with this crazed look in her eyes, she says, "I'm being treated like a Jew in Nazi Germany being told to stand in the gutters." Seriously, I almost laughed, it was so faked. At that point, I went back inside and told my dad to take my mom home. Needless to say, the rest of the meal was extremely awkward. Doesn't matter, had pizza. My parents' sister. Holy faking sheet, rudest prick I've ever met. So many stories, but the one that stands out would have to be just after I had my daughter. I was hosting a meet and greet for her just after I got home from my family. They arrived 4 hours late. I was so tired and just wanted to sleep, but I was polite, so I stayed up. They brought a couple of gifts, and she walks up to me and hands me this bracelet for my daughter. In like, "Oh cool, this is neat, thanks." I put it up and away, so it doesn't get damaged, or my daughter doesn't go and choke on the stuff hanging from it. She gets all angry and doesn't say anything for a while. My daughter gets fussy cause she's hungry and starts crying. Next minute I hear, "Can you shut that faking baby up?" Now I'm a very polite person. I don't swear in front of my elders. Always use manners. I turn and look at her, and she says it again, and proceeds to add, "It's your faking job, shut her up already, or I will." My blood is boiling, and my partner knows I'm about to unleash. Before he can say anything, I pass him the baby, look directly at her, and very loudly scream, "If you don't faking, get the fuck out of my faking house. I'll faking knock your teeth so far down your faking syphilis infected throat beach you'll end up brushing your teeth through that faking stretched out as hole of yours." Everyone was speechless. I'm breathing heavy, I don't know what came over me, I'm just seeing red almost. Next thing I know she starts screaming and crying, demanding the bracelet back. I'm like, "Faking take it, or I'll shove it up your ass." They left straight away, and my mum, who was still there, is looking pale and shocked that I did that. My partner's parents are well aware she's a cunt who says she'd to stir me up, so they were shocked, cause I'm usually well mannered and take it well, but her threatening my newborn daughter like that turned me into some raging beach. TLDR, my partner's sister threatened my newborn daughter. Me being well behaved and mannered lets fly a fury of swear words and abuse in front of everyone, including my mum. We both chucked a tantrum. I have a crazy unstable mother. She thinks God and cats talk to her. My sister and I haven't spoken to her in 2 years, since she nearly killed my nephew while driving him around. She was abusing pain meds and passed out behind the wheel. We never even would have known about it. She joked about it over Thanksgiving dinner after a glass of wine, as though it was an innocent funny little anecdote. One time when I was around 9, she told me to throw out her cigarettes because she wanted to quit. This was not the first time. She had tried several times in the past. So I did, but I stomped on and twisted them around first to make sure they were thoroughly shredded, because as I rightfully reasoned, she was relying on me because she couldn't handle it herself. The next day she went to rummage through the trash, so I went and hid. She lost her sheet when she found the disintegrated cigarettes. She ran through the house screaming like a banshee looking for me, upending everything in a desperate, incoherent rage. She literally tore the house apart looking for me. Eventually she found me, and I have never been so terrified in my life. She was a twisted monster of psychotic rage I can't even begin to describe. Beat red and sweaty, her face was literally out of her control, twisting and warping around in ways faces shouldn't. After shouting, apologizing, throwing me around, crying, apologizing, shouting, throwing me around some more. It was like her face was fighting itself even as she was shifting back and forth between rage and remorse. Eventually I gave up and told her she needed to go get some cigarettes and leave me alone. She'd always been unstable and this was not at all her first tantrum, but I grew up just naturally assuming I was a problem and deserved it. I gave up on her then and there, her violent outburst just so over the top absurd. I realized she was a crazy bat and I needed to look after myself. After visiting my dad the next weekend, no, I didn't tell him. I was terrified of him. She tried to convince me the bruises were from him and took photos and everything. I told my aunts sometime later, but they just looked at me sadly and didn't say anything. That was hardly the end of it. Until I got out of there, she was just getting more and more unhinged. Eventually she would lose her shit over things that never even happened. 2 years ago, after the incident with my nephew, my sister called up my aunt, and my aunt broke down crying and told my sister my mother used to torture her when they were growing up. The last thing I heard about her, she had an outburst calling my aunts and freaking out that my sister's husband was sexually assaulting their son. Despite the fact that no one had been talking to her for about a year, even if it were true, not true, she literally could not have known about it. The faked up thing is how detailed her description was, like she is vividly fantasizing about this awful stuff. It's actually terrifying. Some guy was screaming at a server while standing in line at a coffee shop, proclaiming that the service was being extremely tardy and how dare their service be so incompetent. There was maybe 20 people in line at the time and the place was extremely busy. The poor servers were running around like crazy doing their best job, and this guy snapped screaming his head off while everyone in line is trying to ignore him. I don't know who I was more disappointed with, the irrational irate idiot or the other customers who tried to pretend that nothing was happening. After about 30 seconds I was like, bro, what the fuck is wrong with you? I think I snapped on him 5x as hard as he did to the poor staff. He didn't expect it in the least. I've had minimum wage jobs where you get treated like shit and you're replaceable, so don't you dare talk back to shitty people. I always wanted to stand up for young me in my minimum wage job. This was my perfect opportunity and I tore into him about how dare he be so rude, ignorant, and to never demoralize anyone like he just did for doing their job as best as they can. And how much a pose he is. He shut his mouth instantly, just stared at the ground afterwards till he got his coffee. Then all of us 20 people in line had another few awkwardly silent minutes waiting for our coffees, then went on our separate ways. TLDR, it feels amazing standing up for the helpless. I suggest everyone tries it more often. My mother was cleaning off her dresser and found that several of her necklaces had gotten tangled with each other. Frustrating, sure, but not deserving what came next. She threw the necklaces in the trash, started screaming and throwing things around her room. My father tried to calm her down and tell her he would untangle the necklaces for her, but she was having none of it. He took the necklaces out of the trash and sat at the dining room table trying to untangle them while she continued her tantrum. While he was working on the necklaces, she was literally on the floor of her room, kicking and screaming. I think she was trying to make sure no one else came into the room as she kicked holes in the door and the wall next to the door, screaming the whole time about how she hated us all and wished we, my siblings and I, had never been born, and she had never married my father. At one point I tried to calm her down, and she told me she hated me, that I was never wanted, and shouldn't have been born, and she wished she wasn't my mother. In the end, we just left her to wear herself out. Once she stopped, my father gave her the necklaces back. It had only taken him a couple minutes to untangle them. She put them back in her jewelry box and never even said thank you. We never talked about it again. To be honest, I doubt she even remembers. It was just a drop in the hat for her horrible behavior. I'll always remember though, it was my birthday and my gift that year was the confirmation that my mother hated me. This one wasn't that big a meltdown, really, but the finale was what makes it special. We had been doing transfers of departments, floor by floor, to a new building over the weekends. By week .16 or so, we had it going pretty slick. Had a lot of shouting from one office, went in to find all the laborers standing in a half circle, while this stuffed shirt, whose nickname was Go Slow Onslaught, ranting about the desk that 2 of the guys had just delivered. What's wrong? I stupidly asked. This desk. It's wrong for the standard hanging files. Can't be, we've delivered the same one to every floor, look. He says, and pulls a drawer out, and proceeds to try and push the files in crossways. They don't fit, and he throws them at me. I look at it for a second, then pull the drawer out another 4 inches, turn the files 90 degrees and drop them onto the hangers. There was a pause, during which all the laborers turn away with a sharp intake of breath and choking noises. And all these chairs, they're absolutely useless. Looking back at it, by Monday I would have been the hero to all the maintenance staff for that, except I never got to bask in their approval. Monday was day 1 of mass layoff that we had been expecting for about a month. Saturday recreational soccer. My mom had to work that day, so my brother drove us to the fields. My brother had to referee an under-8 match and I played in a match just before his started. After my game I sat down next to the field where he was officiating. Even though this was U8 it was getting kind of intense. To help set the scene, there is some cultural and personal context to understand. This was in Northeast Texas. High school football, American football, was the big sports scene in this region. Along with that is an intense fandom that produces rowdy behavior that can result in unfortunate jeers. The personal backstory to consider is that my brother could, if provoked, exhibit disrespectful, rebellious teenage behavior towards adults. Maybe not too uncommon of a thing. Back to the story. As stated, the match was getting intense and the fans, who seemed to be well-cultured high school football fans, were yelling that my brother needed to improve his officiating. My brother was fed up and his body language and responses were only further inciting the crowd. My bro blew the whistle for a foul for whatever reason and the crowd erupted with disapproval. The coach proceeded to yell at the top of his lungs and my brother approached him. He said, "Sir, you need to sit down and shut up." This was a 40-plus-year-old man and the event that ensued suggested he wasn't going to let some punk teenage referee talk to him that way. The guy threw his hat on the ground and started chasing my brother. Fortunately my brother was able to elude him. The great thing about this 30-second chase scene was that my brother managed to pull out and present his red card to him while running away. It was such a terrifying moment but also hilarious. After the coach stopped his pursuit due to fatigue, he was asked to leave the fields by other officials in the league. TLDR, a 40-plus-year-old man chased a teenage soccer referee while being presented a red card. I was at one of the free Smithsonian museums in DC when a homeless guy came up and handed me one of those papers that says he is deaf and would like a donation. I didn't have any cash, so I smiled and said sorry. He seemed friendly enough and walked away. About 30 minutes later I'm standing next to an exhibit talking to my mom on the phone, and he runs up in my face and starts yelling to get out of here and kept rearing back to punch me in the face. He then starts yelling that's bullshit. I'm not a fighter but I'm also too stubborn to walk away, so I just keep saying I really don't know what your problem is, but I'm not going anywhere. He keeps threatening to hit me and yelling, but finally walks away. By this point I could tell he obviously had problems, so I figure it best to tell security, and as I'm walking that way he starts following me. When I tell security what he did he comes up yelling at me and insinuating that I did some kind of pelvic thrust when he walked by me. I'm completely baffled by what's happening and tell the security guard that I'm not sure what's happening. Eventually they escorted him out. The whole event was pretty bizarre. I hope whatever mental illness he had got treated. Oh boy. Story time. So I've seen lots and lots of drunk dudes come into the strip club and lose their shit. It's hard to think of just one when it happens literally every night. Here's the narrative. 5 rich guys come into the club trying to bro it up. They're the boring type. They all make $250,000 plus a year, have a trophy wife and kids of equal caliber. After being neglected they want a damn good time and some much needed sexual attention. The catch. They've all got money, but they also know that Steve makes way more than them and has dad's money. Tonight, everyone is taking Steve for a faking ride. Now, Steve is macho. He loves the attention he gets when he starts throwing money, so he lets it all out. His table looks like Scrooge McDuck with stacks of 1s and 20s on the table. Everyone's got a little bag of blow and a girl to keep them happy. Steve is also the kind of person where, if all his friends are happy, he is happy. Usually the guys have a good time. Steve picks up the tab on everything. Lap dances for all his pals, and plenty for himself. They get drunk. They are happy and entertained. The girls are making money, and these guys aren't broke. They frequent strip clubs, and know what they are getting into. How do I know? They brag about it. We were in Z's clubs last week. Literally word for word. Chances are, I've actually met Steve before, but he doesn't remember me. Blow and booze will do that, yeah no? Before you know it, Steve's tab is $5,000. When the oil boom was going on, sometimes it would be closer to $10,000, $20,000. The money was really out of control. At the end of the night, I would be standing at the bar with some of these guys, after entertaining them all night, closing out their tab, and the dude with his name on the card would be absolutely losing his mind. How did this happen? What did y'all order? Are you all fucking kidding me? This is robbery. I'm not paying this. You girls are coming back to the hotel, because after what I paid you, you're gonna fuck us. I've had guys get violent, start threatening me and my co-workers, arguing with managers and bar staff, demanding a refund. Clubs have policies in place that make it impossible to get out of paying a tab. Most strip clubs have you sign an agreement when you open your tab stating that this level of partying can happen and that you agree to the charges if you do not close your tab at the end of the night. It's to keep people from walking their tab and this from happening. 2. The waitresses I work with are extremely good at asking for permission when adding things to the tab, like dances and drinks, so the guy has said yes to literally everything that was ordered, meaning he must pay for it. While Steve may be screaming and making a scene, the bouncer will never bounce this guy unless he starts throwing punches. The manager will usually talk Steve down, reason with him, and get the final signature. Steve's last hurrah is usually him screaming and being verbally aggressive before conceding to what has occurred. Strip club managers are verbal ninjas that can talk down almost anyone. Sometimes the plot is extra thick. I've also had guys assault me. This means I'm taking their tab for an extra special ride. TLDR, guys go the trap and rack up thousands of dollars in liquor and girls for their boys, trying to stunt and show off. Despite personally earning $250k plus a year, are confused about how $500 x 10 equals $5,000. I will man up here and say it was me. Hands down. I completely lost my shit on a train in Italy. Warning, my entitled cranky beaching ahead for next few paragraphs. About 2 years ago, I was in Italy on vacation with my partner. He's fond of trains, so as a treat, I got us train tickets from Rome to Venice on a Frecciarossa, which was quite new to us, since in the US we don't take trains, and the ones that are here are not terribly fast. I made sure to get the best tickets, something like €200 each, first class, reserved seats in a specific coach with some sort of cabin, good view, etc. We got to Roma Termini well ahead of time, and due to my partner's poor grasp of the Italian language and stubborn belief that I'm incapable of learning a single word of Italian, despite my being fluent in French and handily conversational in Spanish, in the previous 10 days we were in Italy, he forced us to schlep our bags, we each had 2 plus a carry-on/backpack thing, through each and every car, until we got to car 1. Yes, that's right. My derpy partner made us carry our luggage all the way through every single rail car, because he didn't believe I knew that Carrozza 1 meant coach 1. FYI, those things aren't all in straight lines, and they're freaking long. Especially when you get on at what seems to be Carrozza 99. There was a lot of scusa going on because we were hellbent on getting to our seats in car 1 and Italian train travelers seem to like to congregate in doorways. So we finally get to our coach and find our seats. Except they are occupied by 2 large Italian ladies. I wave my tickets at them and issue a polite "scusi." No effect. Okay, let me try some Italo-Franco Spaniel on them. Miss QC. Costi sono riservati. They didn't even make eye contact. What the fuck? Now the train lurches and starts moving. The conductor, who is a peri-adolescent female who could not have been any older than 16 and a half, comes by to sternly tell us 2 fat sweaty American gay men ensconced by luggage and shopping bags to take their seats. I point at the 2 fat sweaty Italian women in our seats and say, "We can't." They are sitting there, with every attempt to sound like a sorry traveler, to get a little sympathy. Miracle of miracles, this teenage train conductor spoke better English than the kids riding skateboards down my street here in Chicago. She has a hurried chatter with the 2 old biddies, frowns, then turns to me and says, "I'm sorry, sir, but they are sitting in your seat." "Yes, I know that. Tell them to move." Well, you see, they are pensioners. I really don't care if they are retired or not. I paid over €400 for those seats. More rapid Italian chatter. This entire time I'm starting to turn more and more red, get more and more hot, and sweat is noticeably streaming down my face, chest, back, and probably anywhere else I have sweat glands. Like I said, I'm a fat American and this is not getting prettier. Eventually she says there is nothing that I can do. They are sitting there. They are pensioners. You should sit somewhere else. I lose my mind. I go off. On her, on the two old women, on the other two people sitting across from them, on my partner for not trying to help. The whole time, not a single person reacted. Except my partner, who grabbed his bags and disappeared. The asshole. I'm seriously losing my shit at this point. I'm in a foreign country, spending a shit ton of money, just to get from point A to point B in some comfort and air conditioning. Here I'm trying to just get to Venetia with tickets I paid for, and I'm told that they are old, so they will sit in the seats you paid for. I later learned that they had second class tickets and were supposed to be like 10 cars away. Not that it matters, because that's where the conductor teen told me I could go. With all my shit, I was shaking, shouting, red, and sweaty. I realize now that it was an anxiety attack developing into an acute nervous breakdown. I mean, this was the real deal. Couldn't breathe, afraid for my life, heart beating through my chest, extreme paranoia, and sweating like hoe in church. At the time, I just wanted to alternately die and or kill someone. Wasn't really sure which one of them would be thrown out of the train by me first, one lady, the other, or my partner, if I could find him, or myself. I didn't talk to my partner for 2 days following that stunt of his, in Venice, on a 3-day trip to Venice, lol. So if you are that teenage train conductor in Italy, I'm sorry I screamed at you. It was not very nice of me. However, I will still stand my ground here and say that if I had tickets for those seats, those old ladies should have been asked to move elsewhere, or I should be refunded the difference. To this day, nobody has been successfully able to explain to me how or why this happened, because even our friends in Florence say that is not possible. But it happened. So yeah, if you are those two old ladies, fuck you sideways with a spaghetti fork. Diaf. Because of you I now have to take pills to reduce my anxiety in train stations. The funny thing, I fly to 4x/week for work. I have never had any sort of issue on a plane. Then again, I've never been told my seat was given to someone else. But if I so much as even think of taking the subway, I start freaking out. TLDR, I freaked out on a train in Italy because old people wouldn't move out of my way, even though I paid for the seats. I worked at a retail store, Finish Line, and we sold shoes there. One of the reasons that store is popular is because they sell the limited Michael Jordan shoes, which are super popular with shoe fanatics. Anyways, I was pretty young at the time, about 19, and we had a shoe being released the next day. Now we only received a limited amount, probably 12 pairs. And to make it fair for everyone we handed out 1,000 raffle tickets. You wrote down your size, and if we had it, we would send it to you after you paid. But as soon as the raffle tickets were gone there were no more entries. So we ran out of tickets pretty quick, and I had several customers who were unhappy when I told them we had run out. They would do things like tell me, "Can I speak to the manager? That's faking stupid. What about the rest of us who were working, and can't you get me a ticket anyways?" But my favorite was when one guy, a well-dressed Asian man, walks up to me with his wife and kid, and he was very polite at first. He asked me if I could get him a ticket. After I told him, and I told him no sorry, he quickly got super pissed, turned bright red, and told me he could take my job. He would beat my ass outside, and he was going to wait for me to leave the mall and jump me. Needless to say, I called the cops and pressed charges. TLDR, worked at a shoe store selling Jordans. We run out of tickets, guy gets angry, threatens to take away my job, W/E that means, and tells me he's gonna jump me after work, while his wife and daughter are standing there. Worst? Dunno, I have a ton. Best karma one, oh hell yes. I used to own and operate my own PC repair / sales business, so I have a few humdingers. My all-time favorite revolves around, let's call him Mr. I Know My Rights D. Mr. D comes in and wants to buy a DVD drive. Back in the day, when they were pretty much latest technology. Anyway, there was 2 connection methods at the time, so I do the right thing and explain the difference. Asking each time, are you sure this is the correct one etc. I'm assured he knows what he is doing. Now, I bet you know where this is going. You would be wrong. About a week later he is back with the DVD drive and the discs that go with it, demanding a refund. When asked what is wrong with it, I'm informed nothing, I just changed my mind. Retail laws in Australia are pretty clear on this. Just changing your mind means I really don't have to do anything about it. Damaged, not working as advertised etc. Point is a different matter altogether, and this is why I went to great length explaining the 2 different connection types. Anyway, we go back and forth for a bit as I'm trying to understand if this guy is for real. The issue is the software is licenses, so if he installed it, I legally and ethically could not sell this item on, or could I get a return with my supplier as it's not damaged? This guy assures me he never used it. Not that I believed that. Anyway, when he then states I could go to and buy a laptop, if I didn't like it, I could return it up to 14 days later for a full refund according to the law. I laughed probably a bit too loud at that, and responded with no worries, good luck, please leave my store. Mr. D got to the door and started screaming with the door open about lousy service, taking me to court etc. I wanted to punch him out. Instead I walked to the till, got out the cash, walked to the door, took the DVD drive, and threw the cash at him. This guy was going off his nut as most of the stores near me had staff outside watching what was going on and ready to jump in if needed. Good group of people. That just shows how much of a scene this guy's is making. To be honest, there wasn't much more I could do, and the cost of this thing just didn't make it worth my while. In the end I decide to throw this thing in one of our test bench machines and just write it off as a bad experience. Not long after installed, a workman needs to use the machine. Opens device, lo and behold there is a rather expensive game at the time, Fear or something, can't really remember. But going price was $100 or so. Workmate wanted to ring the guy and give it back. I snatched it, snapped it, threw it in the bin, and said guy reckons he never used the damn thing. Fast forward a week later, and guess who walks into my store? Mr. D. I come out from the back and just point to the door. He is all apologetic. By this point I have found the legislation and posted it behind the desk, which I then point to the door. This guy's is not getting it. He then has the nerve to ask what did you do with the drive? I think I might have left a mate's game disc in there. Note he doesn't mention the name of the game. I'm stunned. I look at the guy and go, I thought you didn't use it? We threw it out because, as I explained, I could not in good conscience sell that on or get a refund due to there being nothing wrong with it and you could possibly have installed the software. At this point, I get yelled at again because it is my fault for throwing it out. Thank God it never went on show. How the hell would I explain what that disc was doing in there? I mean, this guy is turning red. I couldn't believe it. Not only did he try to rip me off, he is blaming me for ripping me off and for him being a total moron. At this point I stop him by raising my hand and asking him to leave as quietly and menacing as I can be. As he gets to the door I say loud enough to hear, Fear is a faking expensive game, isn't it? Does fit? Then turn away. There are plenty of others, but this was the most satisfying. So I work at a Nike store in Western Australia. It was Christmas Eve, and we close at 9 PM. A frantic looking woman came in at 8:45 PM and runs up to the nearest employee, which happened to be me. Do you have pink Adidas Superstars? I need them for my princess and she'll be heartbroken if she doesn't get them tomorrow. I'm sorry ma'am, but we don't stock Adidas products as we're a Nike store. I don't give a fuck what kind of store you are, I need Adidas Superstars. I understand that ma'am, but we don't sell them. Maybe you could try. Look you Spanish/Italian, I'm from New Zealand. Whatever, I don't give a fuck about what you sell. Now you figure out how to get me these shoes by tonight or else I'm calling your head office at this point. Obviously there's no reasoning with such a delirious individual, so I called my manager into the front. He got a similar treatment as the woman demanded to be given a product we didn't sell. She then accused us of clearly finding pleasure in inconveniencing a honest hard-working female Australian and proceeded to call the police. She stood in our store, screaming and ranting while they came. 5 minutes they arrive, and the new girl shows that she was filming the entire thing, and they arrest the woman for being a public nuisance. TLDR, woman walks into a Nike store at 15 minutes before close on Christmas Eve, demands Adidas product, calls police when we tell her we don't sell Adidas, she ends up being arrested. I'm currently working in a branch of TJ Maxx as a front-end coordinator. Well, in the think of a Saturday afternoon, the manager on duty decided to go on her lunch break and leave me in charge. No big deal. I knew what I was doing. Business went on as usual until one man came to one of my teenage cashier's registers and tried to return something with no receipt and no tag. Normally, since there's no way to tell what the item is or where it came from, we don't take returns without at least one of those two items. Well, when my cashier told him this, he lost it. Screaming at this 17-year-old girl and pointing in her face, telling her she was ripping him off and this company is a disgrace. So I walk over and ask what seems to be the problem here, and the cashier is near tears when the man looks at me and shouts the situation. I tell him, okay sir, I understand, and if you would just give us a minute, I'm sure I can figure this out. I would have to do as a return without receipt, and that requires your driver's license. Well, that pissed him off even more, and he started again with, first you rip me off, then you ask for my personal information. What kind of place are you running here? He shouts, all while the customers around him are staring with eyes wide. I try to calm him down, but to no avail. Finally he gives up and screams, well, I need to speak with the manager. That was what I was waiting for. I looked him in the eyes, smiled ear to ear, and said in the nicest tone, I am the manager sir, and he went pale. His face sank, and he fumbled around in his wallet and pulled out his license and slid it across the counter. We finished the return and he didn't say another word, then hastily left. I hugged my cashier to calm her down and continued my day. Got a good laugh out of it when I told the real manager what she missed. I work in a greenhouse for succulents, which, for those of you who don't know, need a fair amount of light. Because succulents are all the craze, we've divided the greenhouse into sections based on light and water requirements. A week or so ago, a college-aged girl comes in with a friend and asks where she can find succulents that don't need light. I point her to our low light section and explain basic 40H grade science to her. Aca plants need light. She looks defeated, but seems to accept what I've said and starts looking at the plants I've shown her. Less than a minute later she stomps up to me in a huff because I'm forcing ugly plants on her when she really wants these other pretty ones that need full sun. I explain again what light requirements each set of plants needs to survive and tell her she's welcome to try the plant she likes. I just wanted her to have all the info before spending her money on something that might die. She faking loses it. She starts screaming and stamping her feet, arms pumping up and down, fists balled, red-faced, the whole 9 yards. The whole greenhouse is now staring at this girl as she has a complete meltdown. Imagine a 20-something having a fit like an overtired toddler would have, because she likes a plant that I didn't recommend. So I try to defuse the situation, but no matter what I say, I'm now the focal point of this tantrum. Keep in mind, she's losing her mind because she thinks the plants I've suggested are ugly and she prefers a different plant. At no point has anyone told her she can't have the plant she prefers. She's welcome to pick it up and purchase it. She just won't. She starts berating me and screaming about how she's going to take her business elsewhere and how horrible we all are. Blah blah blah. Tears almost streaming down her face at this point, and stamps out of the greenhouse with a basket of items from our nursery. She proceeds to go to the company next door to us to purchase our items, where she's told she can't because they don't belong to them. Gets even more pissed at the world, comes back over and checks out with us. No shame or remorse or anything. Just threw a fit because she liked a plant, then bought some pots instead. TLDR, woman throws full-on temper tantrum because she likes a plant. I'm an engineer for a commercial vehicle company. When I first started, I spent a couple of weeks at one of our assembly plants. to learn about the product while my desk got set up. Our administrator was on vacation when I started, so there was a delay. Our product is highly customized, and therefore it's not a typical robot arms assembly line, but rather a hand-built product. As such, new options often do not work or assemble correctly when they are first tried out. The installers were having issues getting a large electrical wiring harness to route through the vehicle's door conduit, wiring for mirrors, locks, etc. It was a new design and the engineer responsible was there to witness the difficulty. A lot of times, the installers are rude and call the engineers idiots for anything wrong that happens, even when it is their own fault. However, the two demonstrating the trouble on this occasion were being remarkably polite and kind, probably because about 10 people were standing there watching, including the plant manager and some other higher-ups. After some back and forth with the engineer regarding the problem, which was clear to see on the actual vehicle being worked on, the engineer, who to this day I have never seen again, completely freaked out. She began screaming and literally crying about how hard she had worked on this design and how they were being unfair, even though the problem was clearly visible and the installers were being patient. She threw her clipboard and papers on the ground and continued her rant while everyone stood there awkwardly. One of the installers gently suggested her to calm down, which of course produced the opposite effect, specifically her screaming, "Don't tell me to calm down." Eventually her tantrum wound down and someone else was tasked with fixing the problematic design. I think she was reassigned to other job opportunities. Not as theatrical as some of the others here, but it qualifies as the worst for me, just because I was on the receiving end. While in college I worked graveyards at a 7 to 11. At around 3 am a woman pulls up to a gas pump, and about 5 minutes later she comes inside, and it is then I notice she is sporting the full "May I speak to the manager" ensemble. She proceeds to go on a 30-minute tirade at me about the credit card reader at the pump not liking her card, and she was not fond of any of the alternative options I presented. Everything from name calling to threats were hurled, at one point bringing up that she had an infant in the vehicle, which had been unattended for 20+ min at the point. As she huffed and puffed away, I just stood there silently staring at her, waiting for her to leave. Eventually my coworker, who had been in the cooler for the entire event, came out and asked what was going on. I told him, and he tried to talk to her. After taking maybe 30 seconds of her sheet, he said a line I still remember. "Ma'am, I understand you are upset, but you don't have to be a bitch about it." She finally snapped, took the manager's number, and left shortly after. The icing on this sheet cake was that it was my second day on the job and I likely would have quit if not for the manager's reaction to the whole thing. After she called to bitch, he watched the tape and stopped by the next night to talk my coworker. The only part one remember is the second best part of this whole thing. I know she was being a bitch, but you can't say it to her face. He got off with a warning. TLDR, bitch goes psycho, gets called a bitch. Manager agrees and employee gets off with a warning. I saw the beginning of a tantrum last week, but didn't stick around to see the end of it. It was the evening of Valentine's Day, and since my wife and I have an 11-month-old, we had decided to skip the date night, just pick up some chicken and ribs from Swiss Chalet for dinner. I ordered online and was given a pickup time of 5:20. When I got there at 5:15, I could already tell that they were a bit behind on their orders, because a lot of other people seemed to have the same idea as us for dinner. By 5:40, a couple of the people who were there before me started complaining and asking when they should expect their food. One guy wasn't even mad, he just wanted to know if he had enough time to go out and smoke. The cashier starts telling people that due to high volume, they are 15 to 30 minutes behind on food prep. All of a sudden, I just heard a woman yell, "What?" I look over, and the only way I could describe this woman is that she had the body type of a crushed pylon. Small head, small shoulders, a huge ass and thighs, and about 4'6". She proceeded to start yelling, "You better get your faking manager. I'm really faking hungry." Dead silence in the restaurant, and everyone's eyes are on this oddly shaped woman. And what broke the silence? Order ready for pinach. As I went to the counter to get my food, she looked like she wanted to eat me. As I walked past her, I smiled and said, "Have a pleasant evening." She then continued to yell at the cashier while I hauled my fat ass out there. 2 summers ago I was in New Brunswick with my husband visiting his family. Our friend decided to fly in, so we borrowed my father-in-law's little convertible to pick her up at St. John Airport. On the way back, we pull onto the highway, her in the front with husband driving and me in the back. There is a black Escalade in the middle of the highway stopped. As we go to move around it, thinking maybe it's stalled, it rushes in front of us and cuts us off. So my husband honks. That's it. Just honks. The Escalade pulls onto the shoulder and some 100-pound shirtless white kid is asking us if we want to die and then starts charging our car and trying to run us off the road. He leans out his window, barely able to put a sentence together, and punches the hood of our car with his teeny man-child hands. This went on for probably a full minute or more before he gets out of the car, walks up to our car, which is stopped on the highway, and tries to open the driver's side door. My friend and I are ready to get out and knock this guy out. We can easily take him. I mean, he's so high and skinny I could probably fit my fist under his ribs. My husband, however, the calm one, apologizes saying he doesn't want trouble and he just honked because he thought he hadn't seen us. So the meth head is confused by pleasantness and gets back in his car and drives away. I called 911 and reported his plate number and the exit he took right away. The cops called me back later to tell me apparently he pulled the same stunt not far away to another car of people, but didn't put his car in park, and it rolled away and got stuck in a ditch. He would be charged with driving under the influence and probably uttering threats with the other car. The cop seemed to get a kick out of the whole story, as did the 911 operator. TLDR, there are meth heads in New Brunswick. They drive nicer cars than I can ever afford. My ex-girlfriend broke up with me. She was 25 at the time. I said okay cool, I'll move out at the end of finals, about 2 weeks. She left for a few days to hang out with friends. I decided to move all my stuff out while she was gone except some clothes, my bed, and laptop. She comes back, notices everything of mine is gone, and starts flipping out causing I'm moving out. Thought she wanted me out. She kicks the trash can, screams a bit, cries, starts pouting and stomping around the room, then lays on the floor pounding her hands and feet into the ground like a child. It's exactly how it sounds. I of course start laughing cause I don't know what the fuck is going on and this is ridiculous. I finally had to step in when she started trying to stab her leg with pencils. Eventually I find a place and move out. She would call me and talk a bit, then start yelling or getting upset. I would warn her that if she can't talk like an adult I will hang up on her. She hated that lol. Of course she didn't stop, so click. She calls back, and I dance like nothing happened, and she start yelling, "Don't hang up on me." Then I hung up on her again lol. This would go on for a bit, before I got bored and stopped answering. Eventually this happened again where she would call, and I would end up hanging up on her. She called again, and told me she was coming over. Now I never told her where my new place was, but she knew the general area. I quickly park my car in the garage, and go back to playing video games. She calls me and tells me she is outside and I should come out. Luckily she was down the road at some other house. I tell her she's crazy and needs to seek professional help. So what does she do you ask? She decides to push her car horn for a good 15 minutes at 10 PM in a residential neighborhood, all the while telling me in a frustrated child-like voice that I need to come outside. Of course I'm not going to do that and tell her to go home. At some point she realizes this is going nowhere, goes home, then calls me and tells me she just took a ton of pills and to come over or she'll die. I tell her I'm going to call the cops, and realizing that she would lose her job, works with kids, agrees to puking the pills out. To see a grown-ass adult literally throw a temper tantrum with flailing limbs was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. TLDR, New York City trip, shuttle to the airport, insane traffic, mega cunt woman in shuttle, I yell at a complete stranger. When I was 18, my mom and I took a trip to New York City for my birthday. On our last day, we were waiting for our airport shuttle to pick us up in the most incredible traffic I've ever seen. It looked like every street in Manhattan was at a complete standstill, and we were getting really nervous that the driver would never be able to make it to us. Our driver showed up about 30 minutes late, but we didn't even care. I was just thankful he made it to us at all. Probably the coolest shuttle driver we could have asked for. Just a really nice Indian guy who apologized profusely for being late and then explained that we were the first of 4 pickups for that evening. We didn't mind. As long as we were in the shuttle it was fine. So we just relaxed and enjoyed his hilariously stereotypical background music. Very Bollywood-esque. The next 2 pickups took longer than expected, since both people weren't waiting outside the hotels like they were supposed to, so he had to run in and look for them. During both these pickups, he was receiving multiple phone calls that sounded pretty angry. You could hear yelling on the other side of the phone, and he kept trying to explain that every street is at a standstill. Our driver was nice, but not the type to be walked all over, and looked back at us and rolled his eyes as the woman on the phone yelled to no end. He clearly had some tough skin after doing this job for a while. Finally, we reach our final pickup destination. Even with thousands of cars everywhere, you can hear the screaming from his last client all the way from the end of the street. We pull up, and this 30-something woman in a business-style pencil skirt and giant heels is hurling vile insults at our driver before he even gets out of the van. They load up her luggage, and I can hear her talking to the driver outside the car. "How dare you pick me up so goddamn late? I have a flight to catch, and if I miss it, you're going to fucking pay for my new ticket." She climbs into the van and sits in the last available seats at the very back. Nobody spoke a word, but as soon as her ass hit the seat, her complaints started. She yelled over the other 5 people in the car, "Turn that horrible music off. I'm not going to put up with any more of your shit." Our driver wasn't going to just cater to someone who spent the last hour calling him every name imaginable, so he told her, "Well, there are 5 other people in this car, so it'll have to be a group decision. Raise your hand if you want to keep the music on." My mom and I raise our hands in the blink of an eye, and he says, "Well, that's settled. The music stays." It took us 2 hours to get from Manhattan to JFK Airport, and you can bet that no moment was wasted in silence. The first 45 minutes was a solid lecture from this woman about how she'll be calling the shuttle service and our driver would absolutely be fired because she's never been treated so poorly in her life. She demanded he tell her his first and last name so she could directly complain about him, but she couldn't understand how to say his name, so she got frustrated and gave up. Every so often she would type angrily on her BlackBerry or make a phone call and talk to a friend about how awful the shuttle driver was and how he was definitely going to pay for it. It was just a really tense ride for the rest of the passengers. When we finally get to JFK, he drops off the 2 other passenger groups at their terminals first, leaving just my mother, myself, and this woman to be dropped off. She changed seats and moved up to the row directly behind us. At the time, JFK was under major construction and nearly every road was being detoured to another road. Of course, this woman pipes up again with the complaint, "So do you even know where the hell you're going? You keep taking back roads and obviously have no idea what the fuck you're doing." Which continued in that style for about 10 minutes. Normally I'm pretty quiet and generally passive, but at this moment I had reached a breaking point with a complete stranger that I had never crossed before. In the middle of one of her complaints, I turned around and yelled, "Would you shut the fuck up?" In case you don't know what a detour is, it obviously means that the main roads are closed and back roads are his only option. We're all faking sick of your shitty attitude right now, and nobody cares to hear anything that comes out of your vile mouth. I turned back around, and not one more sound was heard. The silence was bliss, and I had never felt that much adrenaline in my life. Our driver dropped us off first, and apologized for us having to experience such a tense ride. He was very sweet, and I just felt sorry that I'm sure the final leg of that ride wasn't going to be enjoyable at all. We found out our flight was delayed by an hour, and my mom was actually relieved. I was really nervous that we would miss the flight, but I didn't want to complain. He was already hearing enough of that. So we took our extra hour and found the nearest airport bar to settle our nerves. Used to work at an amusement park. I have some good stories, but this is my best one. So, you're not supposed to smoke or vape or whatever anywhere, except in the designated smoking areas around the park. There was this one dude in line who was vaping, and it seriously smelled like someone lit a bag of grapes on fire and shit on the fire. To this day I don't know what flavor it was, or how the hell he cold managed to put it in his body. I went up to him and politely asked him not to vape in line, that people may be allergic to the fumes, all that stuff. He doesn't like that. Instead of listening like a rational, empathetic human being, this dude just takes a huge puff and blows the awful shit in my face. I swear, I almost threw up. After this, him and his girlfriend started telling me to fuck off, who cares if they vape, and what was I gonna do about it? I kicked them out of line. I was pretty pissed when I saw them in my line again later that day, but they didn't see me, and the guy wasn't vaping, so maybe I won. I dunno. Back in the day, I used to cashier at a demonstration cart. We had different items to sell over the years. This year was a food chopper. It was loud and attracted a lot of attention. We were mid-Saturday and the salespeople were mid-pitch. A man came up to me and asked the price. It's part of the pitch and the cashiers were trained not to tell the price, plus the guy cut in line in front of a hunch of customers. I directed him back to the salesperson, but the guy kept bugging me mid-sentence with the customers, who had been waiting long before him. At one point, he grabbed my shoulder, but I wrenched away and grabbed the attention of one of the sales guys to take care of it. One of the salespeople tried to tell him the price, but then he started yelling about how I wouldn't tell him the price. The manager caught wind of it and started screaming at him while cutting Vegas to move on to the next demo. They get into a screaming match in front of literally hundreds of people, wall-to-wall people, and then the manager starts waving his knife around. At this point, he's dragged off by his wife and daughters, still screaming about me not telling him the price. A minute later, security stops by to find out what happened, and I gave them a brief rundown of all that went on. They put out an alert to find the guy and kick him out. They found him, attempted to remove him from the mall. There was a scuffle, police moved in, and the guy accidentally punched one of the police officers. Case closed. He was arrested. Retail worker here. A guy had found a pair of unopened earbuds off the floor and asked me if he can keep it. I asked to see it, and it didn't have a barcode on it, so I told him I was gonna put it in 1506, a place where broken/stolen items go. He insisted that I give it to him, but I kept telling him why I can't. As soon as I go to help another customer, a coworker is heading my direction and the guy immediately tells him that I snatched the earbuds away from him and starts getting up in my face. At this point, my coworker tells the guy to back off and tells him the same thing I did. The guy is still complaining about the earbuds, however the other customer that I had begun to help also stays the same thing me and my coworker says. So by this point the angry customer demands to speak with the manager. Manager says the same thing we already told him, and he appears to have let it go by now. As soon as I'm ringing up customers, I see him already ringing out. Then he turns at me and says, "You think this is a faking game? You'll get hurt for snatching stuff out of my hands." So I'm just standing there trying not laugh at this guy's sudden pathetic sore loserness, but I couldn't help it, and he caught me smiling and then said, "You still think this is a faking game? You better wake up and smell the coffee I get myself together and tell him sorry I don't drink coffee." So yeah, that's not gonna happen now. I had my coworker that was ringing him out laughing and he left without saying anything else. TLDR, guy got angry because I didn't let him have a pair of earbuds, got told by manager, coworker, and customer why I couldn't do that. Proceeded to make verbal threats, left ashamed. I'm a barista. When someone orders a hot tea, we give them the tea bag and cup and the hot water is self-service a couple feet away. It's not difficult. This 50-year-old woman comes in with a small dog in her arms, orders her tea, and receives the cup and tea bag. She then proceeds to go behind the counter, which is obviously not allowed by a customer with a dog because of health and safety regulations. She walks over to our personal hot water tap in the kitchen and begins filling up her cup. I go up to her and say, "Excuse me, ma'am, the hot water pump is on the counter. This is for employees only." She scoffs at me and says that water tastes like coffee. It's disgusting. I'm not paying my money to drink filthy water. I assure her that in fact, the container she claims tastes like coffee has never held anything other than water. It's a totally different shape and size than our coffee vessels and literally has water etched into it. She says I can taste it. You think you can lie to me? And so I give up on arguing with her, but ask her to please exit the kitchen area, so I can fill her cup with the hot tap water and hand it to her. I can do it myself. Stephanie, manager, lets me do it all the time. You must be new here. Mind your own business. I have worked here for 2 years and never seen this woman or her dog. She finally storms out with her tea and her dog, and I sanitize the area and sweep to make sure no dog hair is floating around. I told the manager later, and she said the only time she'd met this lady was telling her the exact same thing a few weeks before, and that she most definitely did not give this woman permission to go behind the counter. TLDR, this rude woman with a dog insisted she could climb behind the counter of my coffee shop and make her own drink. I was the merchandising manager at a major chain bookstore. A woman walked in with a hardback book that wouldn't even close. First glance shows that the pages are brown, coffee brown. I see her arms flying around as she yells at a cashier and points at this ruined book. I hear the call on my earpiece that a manager is needed up front. I sighed and made my way to her and the cashier. The woman looked me up and down and said, You're a manager?" I assured her I was and asked what the problem was. She points to the book with its curled up pages and yells in my face that she bought a ruined book by mistake. The cashier slinks away as this woman's spittle rains on my face. I asked what she meant by she bought a ruined book. She leans even closer to me and yells I bought a book that is obviously covered in coffee or something. I don't know, something was spilled on it and I didn't notice until I got home. I couldn't help it. I snorted as I tried to cover my laugh. I said, "You bought this book like this? You came in here and brought this book in this condition to the counter and paid for it without noticing that it doesn't even close? That the pages are brown and curled?" She stomped her foot and accused me of calling her a liar. At this point we have an audience while she screams for her money back and how she was going to tell everybody she knew not to shop at our store. A second manager came up and tried to defuse the situation. She put her hand on my back and said she would take care of it. I threw her a thankful look because I was seconds away from losing my sheet. I had actual spittle on my face and had to walk away before I said something awful 30 minutes later. After I wash my face in the bathroom and compose myself, the horrible lady bumps into me. I had to grab onto a bookshelf so I didn't fall over, and she sneers in my face. Well, that other manager knew I was telling the truth. She waved a card with store credit on it in my face and laughed. It took everything in me not to kick her in her box. I made myself laugh because the first thing I wanted to do was kick her straight in the babamaka. To her it looked like I was laughing at her, but in reality I was laughing at my own thoughts. She grabbed my name badge and yelled, "What's your name? I'm calling corporate on you." I gave her my name and told her to be my guest. I gave her the store number as well so she would get it right. I'm a cashier. Our store has the self-checkout units. Basically 2 employees are running 6 to 10 registers at one time. We are there to shut up the robots when something trivial happens and make sure no one runs away without paying. While I could name off a number of adult temper tantrums, screaming at the robot, "She can't hear you by the way," screen punching, more than one occasion of these things are turkey gerbs, but there's one I really can't wrap my head around. I'm running all 10 robots by myself. This is frowned upon, but we were short-staffed and my coworker was only going on a 15-minute break. It was quiet when she left, but I got swamped as soon as she walked off. Anyway, this woman starts ringing out her order, and halfway through she walks up to me and hands me her 2 bottles of vitamins she was going to buy. "These are both half off because the prices on the screen are wrong," she says, somewhat bossy-ish. I'm confused because there was no markdown discount sticker on either one, and our vitamins are always buy one, get one free. Always have been. It would have made no sense to make them both half off, and her logic was just making things complicated. I kindly explained that one bottle would actually be free once she pushed the total button. Our system is a fac. Anything BOGO doesn't tally out until the total button is pushed, but she wouldn't have it. She started yelling at me that it never works when I do it. You're supposed to do what I say, now fix this. I can't believe this. The service here is awful, generally just being an awful human being for about 5 minutes, while several of my other robots were pinging me for service. I finally got fed up, gave her the half off prices, then walked off while saying, forget it, not a wise choice on my part, and I acknowledged that, and went to help the 5 or 6 other robots that were going off and genuinely needed my help. I could hear her beaching from the opposite side of the self-checkout area that the customer is always right, but I couldn't care less for her at this point. I didn't see her leave, but the customer who used her robot after her was kind enough to bring me the $100 cash she got off her card and left in the machine. I called my manager to come get it and explained the situation I'd had with her. He didn't understand her logic either. I used to work at a family-owned pizza place in Richmond, Virginia. One night an older guy comes in and pays for his pizza that he had ordered over the phone, so I tell him it'll be out soon. About 5 to 10 minutes go by, and while I'm taking an order on the phone he rudely interrupts me. I see a goddamn pizza sitting back there on top of the oven and there isn't anyone else in here. I ask the person on the phone to hold and go back to check the name on the side of the pizza box. It turns out it was his, so I apologize for the wait and hand him the box. You know, you just made me wait in here for 20 minutes to give me a pizza that's been sitting out and is probably cold now. Is this how you treat all of your customers? I apologized again for his minor wait, not 20 minutes, and asked him if I could get him a bottled soda on the house. This pizza is cold now, since it's been sitting up there for so long, and all you're gonna do is offer me a soda? I replied, the pizza has been sitting on top of an industrial oven since you got here. I can assure you it's not cold. Are you really gonna be a faking smartass right now? You know I'm good friends with the owner here, and I can get you fired. At this point I was over dealing with this asshole, so I responded, go for it. That really faking pushed his buttons. He requested my name, which I gave, and told me he would be in contact with the owner to get me fired over a short wait and soda offering. I wished him good luck and smiled as he flicked me off while storming out of the place. Some people, man. This is my favorite story to tell. I work in retail, so I was serving this guy on the shop floor, trying to find the product he was after. Another customer was in the way, looking in the opposite direction. Our aisles are about 4 feet apart from each other and this guy was bending all the way across. I asked politely, excuse my please sir, I just need to grab something from the section behind you. Waiting a few seconds, and he was still there, not moving. I just figured he didn't hear me, so I repeated myself, but louder. Same response. So I see the product his face on, so I go to grab it. I don't even touch the customer or nudge him. I ninja grab what I need for the other customer. This is what follows. The in the way customer slammed something back onto the shelves, mutters something, goes over to my colleague and starts yelling at the top of his voice, your colleague just pushed me out of my way. I'm a customer and I have a right to view your products. He should wait for me. Then comes over to me, I'm going to faking knock you out. I'm going to wait for you outside. I will faking knock you out. At this point, I'm honestly just trying not to laugh, as well as being a little scared for my life. He got this mad over completely ignoring me. I would like to point out that this guy isn't deaf at all. I've dealt with him plenty of times before, and each time he has been super nice and heard me every time, without me having to raise my voice. Okay, I'm late, but I've got a good one. I was at a high school soccer match and our home team bleachers were on one side of the field and the away bleachers on the other. Well, this mom from the opposing team for some reason decides to stand directly in front of our student section. Now it's the student section and Elliot starts heckling a bit, and honestly he wasn't being bad at all. It was some lightest heckling. Oh, Ginger's got the ball. Check out Red Sox over here. You cheering for our team? Just like making people laugh truly without being mean. Well, I guess Elliot picked on the wrong guy because he threw one out about this lady's son apparently, and she goes nuts. She whips around at all of us and goes, stop that. Of course everyone in the section starts laughing, but this makes her freak out more. Stop. Stop laughing. How could you do this to my son? Stop it, you immature evil children. Oh, we are roaring with laughter and Elliot starts just cheering for us really loud. Geo. Go Eagles. Yeah, beat them, Eagles are the best. And even this pisses her off, stop it. And Elliot goes, stop cheering for my own team. And at this point people are starting to boo her, yell stuff like, why are you standing in our student section then? Just go to your side. But she refuses to move and has completely turned her back to the game to try arguing with us. So she turns to the admin in the section and goes, are you the mom? Are you the mom that's allowing all this to happen? You're a terrible mom if you think this is okay. And she just laughs and goes, no, I'm admin and I think it's fine. Well, this lady just explodes in a shriek and one girl yells, how old are you? And the lady snaps back, how old are you? And the girl goes, 17, that's literally my point. This got her and she stormed off and demanded to speak with both schools' athletic directors. Hilarious. I worked at a college bookstore for 4 years. I actually loved the job and the vast majority of customer interactions were pleasant enough. Some customers could be real assholes, but they were usually short interactions if they were unpleasant. This lady took the cake, though. Luckily I wasn't dealing with her, I was watching from the side. It was after the end of the semester, when we were finally done with the craziness of Buibac. People were still coming in to sell books, but it wasn't insane, like it was the week before. A woman comes in and says that she got an email about a book she had rented, saying that it was due. A few days earlier, she had sold back the book because she didn't realize it was a rental and received $11. Right off the bat, she was hostile and accusing. She blamed us for not knowing that it was a rental, even though it's her responsibility for knowing what she rented. It likely had a rental sticker on it, so someone probably dropped the ball. But when we are scanning hundreds of books a day, they slip through the cracks, and there's no other way to tell if a book is rented or bought unless we bring up every customer's rental information, which is unnecessary for a Buibac. My coworker says he'll see what he can do, and she already starts screaming at him, calling us criminals and thieves. He runs to get the manager, who starts to deal with her. The manager tells her that it's fine, and we can mark the rental as returned. Luckily it was a copy of the book we kept from Buibac. We usually pack them up and ship them out immediately. We just need the $11 back that we gave her for Buibac, considering that it was never supposed to be sold back. She flips the fuck out, even more than she already was, screaming, cursing, calling us Sherlocks, and says that she already spent the $11 she got back and didn't have it on her. The manager continues to patiently explain that she will absolutely not fix the rental until we receive the $11 she was mistakenly given, and refusing this will instead cost her more, as she needs to pay the replacement fees for being negligent in returning a rental. She does not get to return a rental and reap the benefits of a Buibac, because we're not in the habit of giving away free money. This woman shrieked and yelled for 30 minutes until she finally stormed away. I'm not actually sure how it ended, since I actually had to go to do some work, but if I recall correctly, the assistant manager stepped in and threatened to call security on her. I don't think she ended up paying the money back and would have incurred a bigger charge for rental fees. TLDR, bookstore customer wants to return a rental and get money for selling it back and has the worst tantrum I have ever seen from anyone over $11. I live in Japan, where public decorum is usually pretty high, which made this all the more shocking. A young woman, college age, was riding her bicycle on the sidewalk. I live in Kyoto, and everyone does this. A man was parking his own bicycle against a fence in front of a store, and took a step backwards onto the sidewalk, and stepped into her path. The young woman very slightly clipped him. It was so slight, that she kept on cycling. Wrong guy to do this to, apparently. His voice exploded, and he yelled at her in a really guttural tone, using what sounded to me like a rough and streety version of a very assertive and domineering expression, ordering her back. The poor young woman froze, then stopped her bike, and got off it, obeying his demand that she come back and apologize. He berated her for a minute or so, then made her do the Jizarabo of apology, where she had to kneel on the sidewalk in view of everyone. and then bow her head down to the ground towards him. It's both an apology and a form of humiliation. Then he said something like, "Okay, you can go," and he turned and walked into the store. The woman was shaking as she got up and quickly walked back to her bicycle and left. My Japanese friends tell me that he was probably a Yakuza member. This probably won't get seen, but this is one of the most faked up things I ever witnessed. At my local mall, there used to be this nail salon place. It was really big and right near one of the exits. My friends and I were sitting on a bench nearby when we saw a lady with a baby in a stroller and a toddler walking next to her go towards the exits. She suddenly stopped, turned around, and closed the door of the nail salon. An employee immediately opened the door back up. Lady starts yelling at the guy for opening the door. Guy tries to explain that they can't leave the door closed because of the fumes or something. Lady starts screaming that the fumes are poisoning her children and making the entire mall reek. Now, I was sitting about 20 feet away from the argument and I couldn't smell a thing. But anyway, lady is like inches from this guy's face, screaming at the top of her lungs and trying to get around him to grab the door. Guy is still calmly trying to explain to her that the doors must stay open and she cold walked on the other side of the hallway if she was that worried about fumes. Lady is now screaming and cursing. Mall security is now walking towards the scene. The lady's back is completely turned to her kids. The toddler starts tugging on some bags that are hanging off the stroller handles. All of a sudden, the stroller flips backwards. I could hear the crack of the infant's head hit the floor. It is like dead silent for a couple of horrible seconds. I thought the baby died, but then it started crying. The lady yanks the baby up under its arms, not supporting the head but in any way, picks the stroller up, puts the baby back in, grabs the toddler's arm, and jicks out of there. The whole time the guy is just staring with his mouth agape, and the security guard is trying to get the lady to stop so he can call an ambulance. Lady brushes right by the security guard and goes outside. I have no idea what happened after that. The security guard ran after her, and I have no idea if CPS was called or an ambulance or what. I guess there are worse things for her baby than brief fumes from a nail salon. It was my baseball coach. Well, it was kind of my baseball coach, because see, the guy was really just a friend of my real coach who came to help out with practices. He didn't come to our games or anything. We were warming up and engaging in casual chatter. I assume that he was trying to talk and he couldn't get our attention or something, but I'm not sure. There was no real build up or anything. He just ran in between all of the players and screamed. Then he picked up a baseball and threw it into another field where there were other players playing a game. He threw it 250 feet. He proceeds to ineligibly growl for some time before stamping his feet and going. I faking woke up and got out of bed so I can come and coach you goddamn pussies. All I wanna do is help, and I can't because you facts are running your goddamn mouth all the time. Cue bewildered parents, our legitimate coach, players, and elderly softball players from the adjacent field staring in disbelief at this belligerent man breaking down like this. Side note, me and all my teammates were 13 years old, and this man was not even an actual coach. TLDR, started a riot by skipping songs paid for by floorpass as I was working at a billiard hall in college for some extra cash, and was mostly at the door checking IDs or bar backing, getting ice, cleaning glasses, etc., but had to sub in behind the bar for the owner while he smoked or ran errands. There was always a really specific crowd of people/regulars in the bar that mostly listened to country or metal, and it was from a paid jukebox we had in the bar. Every other week or so there was always this crew of guys that came in and generally caused me grief, mostly because they would piss all over the floor. Don't ask me why, and I'd have to clean it up. Needless to say, I wasn't happy these guys were there most days. These guys were Mexican or some flavor of Central American, not racist or anything. Here, I honestly just don't know, but the point is they had really specific music tastes that clashed with the general atmosphere of the bar. A lot of the music they played was this wailing type singing with accordions that basically everyone who goes to this bar hated. On this particular night I was having a very bad day for some reason I don't recall, and these guys come in. I leave them be and do my thing around the bar, and at one point in the night I check the bathroom. All is good. As I'm walking out, several of this crew walks in, and I make a point to circle the bar and come right back, and sure enough, piss all over the floor. I go tell the owner/manager, as I have several times in the past, and he shrugs it off as he usually does and makes some comment about not turning away paying customers. I try to brush it off. At one point during the night, these guys interrupt a pretty consistent theme of music on the box with the wailing type music they like, and they also begin to wail to the music. A bunch of the regulars come to the bar and complain about the music, and at that time the owner had stepped out, so I use this button behind the bar that will skip songs. Poor move on my part. This crew of guys approaches the bar screaming and yelling about me skipping their song because they paid for it. I tried to rationalize my decision to them, but was partially because I hated it as well, and they are floor pissers, but it escalated very quickly. Several of the regulars see this happening and immediately get involved, but it only stokes the fire. This get heated up to the point some of the crew start throwing their glasses at me, and they are shattering behind me and breaking other glasses and liquor bottles, and at that point it breaks out into a full-on fist fight in the bar with like 30 people. Pool cues and balls are getting used, broken glass everywhere, several people hospitalized. I was at a Wendy's in suburban Kansas City. This young lady about 19 to 20 years old went through the drive-thru in some Lexus/Infiniti mid-range luxury car, came storming back inside, and proceeded to start cussing out every employee behind the counter because they forgot to give her ketchup or something stupidly trivial like that. This chick is dressed in boots, miniskirt, tank top and some sort of lacy blouse, not strippery, more like spoiled brat Italian with roided out greaseball boyfriend type with rich parents. She's swearing and yelling at the employees and they are just sitting there taking it, like I'm sure they are supposed to. Meanwhile there is two older couples and a family with young kids and everybody's just watching her. After a couple minutes of watching this, I can't take it anymore. I step up and tell her that it doesn't matter what they did wrong. Nobody deserves to be treated the way she's treating them. I tell her to grow up, and she's looking like an idiot. She should just get out and leave everybody alone. I told her I didn't know what was wrong with her, but you need to get right with the Lord or somebody, cause you got serious issues. The exchange stays heated, and then she accuses me of sexual harassment because I said step off beach. I responded with, "Miss Thing, I don't know who the hell you think you are, but see that tall dude over there with the beard? That's my partner of 3 years. I'd never sexually harass you or do anything else with somebody who treats people like shit like you just did." So jit to jit in, she then stormed out of there and squawked her tires on the way past the building, flipping us off. I then told the employees not to let somebody like that get them down. We all are just trying to make a living and most people aren't like that. The other folks in the restaurant said thank you to me for saying something. In my early days in the military, I got stuck working at the search pit that serviced the main entry point for the base. We were doing random vehicle searches and I diverted a car into the search area. Typically the driver stays in the vehicle until you approach them and give them instructions on what you want done. Nope. This woman exits her vehicle screaming about how she doesn't have time for this, blah blah blah. Simultaneously, her vehicle begins to roll forward into a barrier. She never put it in park. At that point she reached a level of pissed I have never seen. 5-year-olds don't throw better tantrums. I was impressed. She went on about how her husband was a colonel and she basically had the same authority as him, my favorite line ever, and how she was going to call him and end my career. So I radio for my flight chief, boss, and he is on his way out. While he is driving out, angry lady calls husband and demands he come end my career. He beats flight chief to gate. Turns out he is a major, one step below what the wife claimed. Doesn't matter, just entertaining for me. He saw the damage to his vehicle and approached me while aggressively gesturing and screaming obscenities. I warned him twice to calm down, and he decided it would be a good idea to push me, a fully armed guy who is trained specifically to subdue military personnel. I put him down on the pavement hard and put him in cuffs. Wife's head explodes. Also decides to charge at me. Flight chief comes from out of nowhere and grabs her. Now they both are in cuffs, cursing me and my flight chief out. While we are getting everything sorted, flight chief peeks into van to find an open container, a pint of something clear, wedged in between the seat and center console. This was on an airplane on a honeymoon. My wife was a bit of a nervous flyer at the time. At any rate, we were on our way to Europe from DFW on British Airways. That matters because BA is very good about serving alcohol and plenty of it. You ask for a beer, you get two. You ask for a vodka, you get two. As was explained by the chubby, incredibly friendly, incredibly gay male flight attendant. Well love, we have a philosophy. We give you a few drinks and you go to sleep. Makes our lives easier, love. So my wife has 2 drinks, leans her seat back, not all the way, about halfway, and starts to go to sleep. I get up to go pee out the 3 Amstels I've had over the course of 30 minutes. As I'm walking back toward the seat I see my wife, furious, turned around in her seat threatening to kick the guy, skinny American, mid-50s, behind her as my wife, and the still sober, but thoroughly entertained Brit tell me, the guy behind her didn't like her moving her seat halfway back. Rather than telling her, he just started jabbing his knees into the back of her seat. She turned around to confront him, and he started yelling at her that she has no right to move her seat back. As I sit down and start trying to calm her down, he kicks the back of her seat so hard it shoots the seat forward. At this point myself and the entertained Brit start to get up. The guy starts screaming again that he is a paying passenger and she had no right to put her seat back. As I'm about to shove my half-consumed, crappy Dutch beer down his throat, our friendly flight attendant shows back up. He tells us to sit down, winks, smiles, and absolutely lays into the dude. Every argument from the idiot behind us is met with, well, put your own seat back. Well, maybe you should have purchased a business class seat. And finally, okay, I'll go speak to the captain and we'll have the police waiting for you on arrival. He even offered the guy a drink to calm him down, which was met with some teetotaling diatribe about drinking on the airplane. The rest of the flight was actually quite pleasant. The guy was afraid to say a word and his traveling partner was thoroughly embarrassed. The badass flight attendant kept bringing us drinks, and the thoroughly entertained Brit and I ended up getting trashed while my wife slept. He even gave us €30 to buy ourselves a drink on him. The rest of the honeymoon was great, except for the hotel in Rome catching on fire. Edit, that was really long, sorry. I'm not sure it's the worst, but it was the first thing I was thinking of. When I was 16 I got a job at a local family restaurant that I would continue to work at right up until I left for college. Shortly after being promoted up to a host, this happened to me. People are insane at family restaurants. By the way, I could tell stories about that place all day. I was trying my hardest to deal with old people's bullshit with a big smile on my face. It was Sunday breakfast, and in this tiniest restaurant of 20 tables, we would get a waitlist of at least 30 people on Sunday mornings. Needless to say, people always thought they were the center of the world and blamed the host for slow wait times. So even a few days in I was already used to dealing with people's bullshit. Usually I fake a smile, tell them okay, and then go to the back and talk about how obnoxious people are. This particular breakfast, an older woman walked in. She was with her mom, I think, who was in a wheelchair. I watch as she tries to open the door. There were 2 doors, one outside and then a small walkway with one entering the actual restaurant. There were windows that you could see through from the host stand for like 5 seconds before throwing her hands up in some lunatic way and then leaving her mother outside under the awning as crowds of people stare. A guy offers to open the door from her, and as he opens it, I hear her scream, "Get the fuck out of here with that nonsense." And then she pushed him away. I then watch as she struggles to open both doors and then huffs and puffs her shoulders up to the counter. This lady then proceeds to collapse on the counter the way someone would in high school who fell asleep in the desk. She starts screaming really loudly into her arms. I'm trying my best not to laugh at this point and I ask, what can I do for her? She then proceeds to scream, "What do you mean, what can you do for me?" And I sit there as her arms flail and she hits some other guy in the face with her arms. He is too petrified to say anything back. She then almost lunges over the counter with her old bony ass finger in my face and proceeds to scream, "What makes you think it's okay to have such heavy doors? Fuck you. Fuck you, fuck you." Small disclaimer, I lived on one of the Great Lakes growing up. Due to high winds, it was required for public businesses to have heavy doors that wouldn't fly open and shatter. As I said, this is a small restaurant, and it goes silent as it's full of people and everyone is staring. I'm watching desperately as my coworkers are holding in laughter, since I'm relatively new and my face just looks shocked. I'm freaking 16 or 17. At this point I'm still a child. I could only imagine how funny this was to someone that wasn't me. She then turns to everyone and screams, "What do you all want? Fuck you and fuck this place. You are all faking idiots. How dare you think this door is acceptable?" She then literally throws herself through crowds of people, and as the doors open I hear her mother yelling, "Yeah, you tell them. Faking ridiculous assholes building doors like this. Those workers should know better." They then storm off with her pushing her mother in the wheelchair and the wheelchair falls off the curb, tumbling this lady. People go to help her, and both of them start screaming fuck you fuck you fuck you blah 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 to everyone. The daughter hoists her mother into her chair, loads into the van, and then flies out of the lot so quick she left skid marks. I wish this was made up. That's all I'm going to say. Q. Middle-aged, single mother with child on holiday. She has booked a rather expensive children-oriented hotel, 4+, with loads of children activities in her native language, Swedish. There's a children's club, children's playground, everything. This whole hotel is explicitly designed, built and managed to cater to families with children between the ages of 4 to 14. This usually results in a 4,5+/5 score on thousands of questionnaires. She and her daughter seemed very pleased with this, as is most people. However, she got very angry and the representatives about one thing: gender neutrality. Apparently, her daughter has participated in the face painting/tattoo activity, and the person in charge had suggested that perhaps she would like a flower or a butterfly. How dare she suggest this? Why not suggest lightning or a Batman? How dare she assume that, just because her daughter was female, that she would appreciate a flower or butterfly over lightning or Batman? And then she continued to rant regarding the wall decor of the hotel in general. We had these large murals of happy families, father, mother, 2 kids. Standard stuff. But what about families with 2 mothers? Or 2 fathers? Or 1 mother? Why were they not represented? The entitlement was strong in this one. When I lived at my ex-boyfriend's house, he lived with his parents, and so did his sister, who was in her mid-20s and studying biology at Queen's University. One day I was making a burger, and I felt lazy and didn't want to fry up any bacon, so I decided to heat up some pre-cooked bacon in the microwave. That microwave was a piece of garbage, and we had been using it for far too long past when we should have thrown it away and gotten a new one. By this point the door would no longer latch shut, and so you couldn't microwave your food because it wouldn't turn on unless the door was completely closed. We had a piece of cardboard we had wedged between the door and the latch to trick the microwave into thinking it was closed, but it was a pain point in the point faking point ass and rarely worked properly. So my boyfriend went to the basement where his sister slept and took the smaller microwave from the rec room and brought it up for me to use. Later that day, Princess comes home from school and sees the other microwave in the kitchen and asks why it's not in the basement. After my boyfriend explained, she started screaming at him to not go in her room. He tried to reason with her that her room was not the basement in its entirety, and that the microwave was to be used by everyone. It wasn't just her popcorn microwave as she liked to call it. Some context: this bitch has had the world given to her. She was the baby of the family and the only daughter. She rides horses, is given money frequently for literally no reason. Her parents have paid for her schooling, but refused to send my ex-boyfriend, and said he can work for it himself. She also refers to her mom's car as her car, and uses it whenever she pleases, calls her mom every name in the book, and then takes the keys. She's a faking cunt. So the mom now walks out to see what all the screaming is about, and my boyfriend tries to explain when his sister cuts him off and spews a load of bullshit. He then explodes because he had taken too much of her crap at that point and had tried to be civil, and tells his mom that his sister is an entitled piece of trash or something along those lines. She raises her pinky and they fall to their knees to praise her and give her whatever she desires, when she begins stamping her feet, shaking her fists, and screaming at the top of her lungs, "Buy me an apartment. I faking hate it here, and I hate all of you. Buy me an apartment so I can faking leave all of you." Explain that logic. Now you tell me how willing you'd be to buy someone an apartment just so they can faking leave you forever. It's like Trump telling Mexico to pay for the wall. Late to the party, but whatever. I used to sell Dippin' Dots at an amusement park. Just Google it if you don't know what they are. This was in the mid-90s, so they were still kinda new back then. This woman comes up with her daughter and asks about them. Doesn't order any, mind you, just asks what they are. Specifically, she says, "I see the toppings, but where is the ice cream?" Understandable mistake, they do kinda look like sprinkles. I go into my spiel explaining that what she's looking at is, in fact, the ice cream. I start to go into how it's flash frozen, but she's having none of it, insists that the dots are a topping and demands to know where the ice cream is, like I'm hiding ice cream somewhere in my sheety little desk-sized stand. I try to give her a brochure that explains how they are made. She refuses to take it and is, at this point, completely losing her sheet and asking where the ice cream is over and over. I'd like to say her kid was mortified, but judging by the expression on the girl's face, this wasn't the first time mommy had some difficulty with a new idea. Finally, trying to be diplomatic, I said it's a little complicated, and she cut me off at the top of her lungs with, "Then maybe you should get a new faking job because you're too stupid for the one you have," and stormed off, still ranting, her slack-jawed spawn waddling implacably behind. TLDR, Medicine Spicer's wife. If you want to see the best and worst of humanity, work retail. Since you want the worst, here it is. I'm working in Store A, which has only been open for 4 or 5 months. It had taken over a building that used to be occupied Store B, which moved across town to become an anchor store for the new mall. I'm on my way to cover for someone's break when I see this guy with a huge propane central heater in his cart. As the good employee that I am, I asked if he needed anything. He proceeded to cuss me out, asking where our heaters were. I had to explain that, since we opened till late in the winter, we never sold any heaters. Even if we did, it's summer and we don't carry heaters in the summer. Perhaps he got it in the previous store. He continued to cuss me out, saying he knew he bought it at this store and that it was defective. His escalating violent tirade was above my minimum wage pay scale, so I told him that they might do a return anyway. It was still in the box, and I've seen items returned that we couldn't have sold returned. He pretty much cursed all the way up to the desk, and I just followed him. When we finally got to the line at the service desk, and he continued to curse and yell that we were incompetent, and that he knew that he bought it here, I noticed a familiar paid sticker and pointed it out to him. He immediately stopped his tirade and calmly walked out with the heater that the logo of Store C's, a similar but completely different store, paid sticker on it. My ex. The infamous pizza argument. Basically, I just got off work, was picking up dinner for my girlfriend and her roommates, so we could hang out. Decided on pizza, texted her and asked what kind I should get. She said she didn't care, I could choose. So I got to Domino's and grabbed 2 pizzas, one with pepperoni, and I decided to get the other one with chicken. I bring it to the apartment and tell her what I get. She lost her sheet and lectured me for like 20 minutes on how chicken is not an ingredient that is supposed to go on pizza. On and on and on. She even insisted that I bring it back and get a proper pizza. I'm usually a really mellow guy, but the pure absurdity of her reaction really ticked me off. We had been getting kind of serious. Actually, we had been engaged for a few months at that point, and I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "So you're going to yell at me over this? Is this how you intend to raise a family together?" Nothing was more important to this woman than the thought of raising children one day. Was her dream. Mine too. So I knew exactly what kind of can I was opening with that comment. But boy did I underestimate her reaction. It ended with a lot of furious yelling and her punching a hole in the wall in her bedroom, and she remained furious with me for several days. Should have broken up with her that day, TBH, but we stayed together for many more months before I finally cut ties and we broke up. TLDR FNK freaked out at me for getting a chicken pizza from Domino's because chicken doesn't belong on pizza. Oh man. Back when I was 16 I was a hostess at this Mexican grill with an awesome view of the sunset. Every evening in the summer around that time we'd be booked solid. I'm talking an hour or so wait for walk-ins. So this one Friday evening we are especially packed, and this lady comes in with a party of 3 and no reservation, and she is demanding a patio table without a reservation on a Friday. So I politely tell her it'll be about an hour. By the time she would have gotten the table the sun would have already set. For the next half hour this lady paces up and down the patio about every 5 minutes to make sure I haven't missed a table getting up. Every time a table does get up she rushes over demanding to be sat ahead of everyone else on the wait list. Anyways, she's getting more and more agitated the longer she waits. Even though I told her it would be an hour, she's pacing, complaining to her friends, and talking loudly about the poor service. So it gets to the point where she is next on the wait list and a patio table opens up. But it's a table for 2 people, not 3. And it would be a fire hazard to sit this lady's fat ass at that table. So does she react like a reasonable adult and continue waiting? No. She decides the best way to handle the situation would be to call a 16-year-old girl incompetent and a bitch, and then throw a stack of menus at her. That was some of the craziest shit I ever saw. Already posted a personal one, but I got one that happened to my older brother too. He works at a well-known grocery store as a cashier part-time front-end manager. One day a guy got into his co-worker's line. His co-worker is a legal immigrant who happens to be Muslim, still has an accent and wears a turban. This guy I'm told moved here at 18 and had become a citizen 10 years prior. Anyways, guy gets in this guy's line. Proceeds to berate this guy as a stupid goddamn immigrant who needs to learn to speak English. He then contests that one of his items was supposed to be on sale with an expired coupon and yells that this goddamn faking Muslim is trying to steal from him. At this point my brother tells me he walks over as this guy is cussing in front of families in a crowded grocery store on Sunday. The guy explains his grievances to my brother and claiming he refused to be checked out by this goddamn camel faker. My brother at this point tells me he is disgusted with the guy berating his co-worker in front of him and a ton of children. He informed the man his coupon was expired and could not be used. The man still refused to be checked out by the goddamn Muslim. My brother then informed him that he would check out at the register he was at with some respect for his customers and employees, or he wouldn't check out at all. When the guy quipped back with the customer is always right and he would complain to corporate and the store manager, my brother said, well, that's your prerogative, sir. I'm sure they'll love to hear this story. Go ahead and leave your basket here, we'll put your items back. Customer proceeds to say, well, fuck you at my brother. Then he takes his cart of unpaid items, $300 worth, and walks out of the front of the store. Cops were called and this racist sheetbag was arrested for shoplifting. My brother got commendations from customers in the line as well as the store manager. The customer may always be right, but not when they are a racist sheetbag in a grocery store that takes an easily $200K just on Sundays. Needless to say, said grocery store to this day doesn't miss his business. Worst. I've seen some bad ones in my time, but my mum will always be the worst. Maybe I think they are the worst because they were always aimed at me, but anyway. One I remember vividly. A week before this happened I had been to another kid's birthday party, food out, then a trip to the cinema. I was the only kid, apart from family, who had been invited. I wish they hadn't moved away. I didn't have friends after that. Anyway, we ate at McDonald's, and I had my very first ever burger. It was amazing. So the next week mum takes me, and I want a burger instead of nuggets. She freaked out at me in the queue, screamed at me that I was going to get mad cow disease from eating a burger. I'm just standing there, a little 7-year-old, as mum raged, and I ordered myself a burger once we were at the counter. She had a major sulk about it as we ate as well. Then there was the time when I was 14. I was studying for the UK SATs quite happily in the front room. I had the TV on in the background. Jetix was having a Red Ranger alert weekend, and I was happily watching the Rangers as I did a practice test. Mum had a habit of interrupting me, while at the same time threatening me to get good grades or else. Well, this day she decides I have to go food shopping with her. I said no, I was busy and the UK premiere of Power Rangers Ninja Storm was coming up, and I wanted to watch it. She freaked out when I refused over and over. She screamed at me, said some very nasty stuff. She did her fake charging at me, trying to intimidate me. I stayed strong and just focused on the paper in front of me, but I was now really upset and mad. She stood over me, screaming. I don't even know how I did it, but I managed to block a punch coming at my head. It just clipped my ear and hurt like hell. Thanks to karate I got away with just a small bruise on my arm. She reeled back from the hit in pain. My ear was stinging. She turned the power off to the house, so I had to go out with her. She turned it back on just before we left, so I was able to stick a VHS in and record what I was missing. All because I wanted to stay home and go some more vision done, and she wanted to power trip. So I'm a social worker who works with developmentally disabled adults. And as a result, I see a fair share of adult temper tantrums. But the worst one I have ever seen was not from my client, let's call her Kelly, it was from her husband Jim. Now Jim is just a grade A asshole and I always have issues with him, and I'm a little uneasy around him, because he's a big guy and I'm a small woman. So Kelly and Jim are moving apartments, and I'm trying to schedule movers for them, only they want to move the next day, and every place I have called has no availability. And they aren't even getting the keys till 5. So I talked to my boss, and I talked to Jim's staff member, he is developmentally disabled as well, and we all agree that the only day that will work is Monday. Because I have to be there, Jim's worker has to be there, and the moving companies are available. So I pass this info along, and Jim just loses his shit. He screams about how he does not want to move Monday, he wants to move tomorrow. He gets on the phone with my boss, and is screaming at her. Calls her names that would make a sailor blush. Then he comes back in, and says that, if they don't move tomorrow they are never moving, and proceeds to open packed boxes and throw shit everywhere. He broke some boxes. Then he turns to me, and just screams incoherent nonsense and storms out. About 10 minutes later he comes back, much calmer, and asks me to schedule movers on Monday. I'm just glad I didn't have to help repack. Pretty much my dad. He has high blood pressure, which explains a lot of his actions, but they were pretty much over the stupidest / smallest shit in retrospect. My parents had the bright idea of my dad tutoring me after he'd come home from work, which by the way, he'd leave for at like 7 and come home and 6 in the evening from. So naturally when I was shit at math he'd get angriest at all the little stuff and snap, doing things like almost destroying my belongings like a video game console. Not his fault for being tired after a full workday, but also his fault for agreeing to that stupid idea, or coming up with it, whichever. Another time a new aquarium I got started leaking, which scared the shit out of me as I just had gotten a bunch of ghost lobsters, I think they are called, to live alongside my betta fish. I was in the bathroom late at night trying to find these hard to see critters to save them, and my dad storms in telling me to turn off everything I was using, or he would flush all my fish. Because I had to go to bed, so we could have a fun time tomorrow going out as a family. I have more stories, but it makes me kind of depressed and mad. He's been less of a consistent asshole the past few years, but those teenage years were such delicate ones, and I've never truly forgiven him for a lot of them, or thought he wasn't an asshole for things he's done. I know he had a hard upbringing, and has the aforementioned high blood pressure, but it doesn't change the way I feel. I used to work as a hotline technical supporter for a major ISP. I mostly worked with businesses, and one day I was contacted by the secretary of some kind of high-up director of a major pharmaceutical company. I could tell right off that the poor secretary was tense and anxious to even be making the call. She asked me if I could call up her boss, who had some issues with her phone. I told her that we usually don't do outgoing calls like this, and that her boss has to call the support line herself. The secretary pleaded with me, and I got the feeling that she was under a lot of pressure from her boss to make sure that I would call her. I took pity on her and told her I would call her boss. She was so relieved, I was kind of scared for her. Anyway, I call up her boss number, and she was clearly driving a car, which was slightly annoying. She told me that all her contacts and data had been wiped from her phone, and wanted our help to fix it. At this point she wasn't outrageous, she was a bit high and mighty, but still sounded like a reasonable, if technically ignorant, person. I tell her that that has nothing to do with the SIM card, which is the only part of the phone we have any power over. That if the phone can make calls, send texts, and browse the internet, that's really all we promise in the contract. That something out of our power has wiped her phone. She goes ballistic, tells me that she bought the phone via our store, and that it's our fault and that she's a director of this company blah blah blah. I try to reason with her, but at this point she was shouting into my ear. I take an alternative approach, which is basically over support. On paper the company can't offer support if the phone does what we provide: call, text, internet. I was trying to appease her and maybe fix her problem. Her phone was an iPhone, which is the brand I use myself. I tell her that if she's lucky then she has a backup of her phone via iTunes or iCloud. After instructing her in the settings we found out that there is no backup. She goes ballistic again. I close the conversation telling her that it's a shitty situation, but the wipe has nothing to do with the SIM card, that it must have been something else, and that I've done everything in my power, but it must have been a glitch or something the like. She shouts at me and tells me I have to call her in 20 minutes. I say goodbye and I don't call her back. It turned out to be a long story, but damn did she need to put both feet on the ground and realize that she can't go about life that way. To this day I feel bad for the secretary. Used to work in a cardiology clinic. TLDR, crazy lady did not to listen. After taking bad medication, I have to deal with her. Story below. This lady calls saying the medication the doc gave her last visit was causing her face to swell. I told her if it's that severe she should go to the emergency room. She says she won't because she's seen what happens in emergency rooms on TV. Her exact words. Again, I insist that she needs treatment fast and that even if she came into our office the doctor wasn't in until a few hours later due to a surgery on the other side of the city. She's adamant that it's not that bad, and she is willing to wait. I tell her once last time to go to the emergency room, and she ends the call by saying I'm heading to your office right now. Cut to about an hour later, this woman shows up, and her face is bad, like stung by angry hornets bad. She walks to the front reception desks and immediately starts shrieking. Her face is so swollen you can barely understand what she is saying. At this point I had enough of her shenanigans harassing my front staff and told her to sit down and shut up. I called the nurse practitioner, NP, over and he looks at her and asks what happened. Crazy Beach says she took the medication again today. Yes, she took it again even after the first time it caused her to start swelling. NP gives her a shot and he tells one of the staff to call the ambulance. While we wait, I get the pleasure of her telling everyone how I told her to come in and intentionally delayed her from seeing the doctor, citing racism, sexism, body shaming, the whole 9 yards. At this point, I had enough and yelled, I told you over the phone to go to the emergency room several times. If you want to die from stupidity please go ahead. Save me some trouble. The EMTs come, put Free Willy on a stretcher and briskly escort her out of the office. If it wasn't for another patient vouching for me that he overheard me telling her to go there, I would have probably been fired. Thanks old man Jenkins, not his real name. I hope they are still treating you well over there. My first marriage ultimately ended in disaster, but that was merely the end. The precursor took place on the day of our wedding. Her stepmother was obviously upset about the money my almost father-in-law had given us for the wedding, and started berating my bride-to-be as we were seeing up the church. It's been 20 years and I can still see her sick, fat face contort with the rage that only $500 owed can cause. I can still hear her screaming at my ex-wife, "You fakers better faking pay me back every cent right faking now." I was in shock, my ex in tears. I ran to her side, but was pushed out of the way by my mother. My tiny little mother got right up in her face, told her to shut up, and leave the proceedings. She then scribbled a check for $500, shoved it in the now stunned face of the screamer, and told her to get the fuck out. It is still the only time I've heard my mother swear, not even when she was angry over being diagnosed with cancer. She utter a foul word. The marriage sucked and ended, but I'll always remember the day my mom showed everyone, God included, that she is a faking boss. I have said this before elsewhere, but an old boss of mine. I was working at a new homes company. We marketed new build homes. I did a lot of the paperwork for them, ordering brochures, kit for the show homes, and the sales girls, and also working out the commissions. One day I had just finished the commissions and passed them across for her to sign off. She comes storming out of her office and throws the paperwork at me and shouts that I should look at it. Everyone in the office is looking at us. It was a small office and I was right in the middle. I pick up the papers and start looking through them. I could not see what was wrong, so I tell her, and she just shouts that I need to look harder. By now she is almost purple and has tears in her eyes, and when she says the word harder she stomps her foot. So I take a look again. I still can't see it. She shouts at me again and stomps her foot and grabs the papers from me, pulls one of them out and points shouting and stomping. There, see, you added an extra 0.5% on. The total is £5 out. The total was something like £1,005. The whole room had gone silent and staring as I took the piece of paper, amended it to £1,000 and initialed it, and then handed it back to her. She looked at me, stomped her foot again, and went back to her office. It was very surreal. No one in the office knew what to do. We are all just astounded at what we had seen. I've posted this story before. I have two friends. Let's call them Laura and Jess. They share the same birthday. We've all been friends since primary school. Laura usually suggested they do a joint party / night out for their birthdays, since they mostly have the same friends and that way they can both celebrate on the actual day. Jess always turned down her offer wanting her own day and would arrange something a month in advance to get in before Laura, even though Laura mostly doesn't really care. For their 21st birthday, Laura was on a study abroad program, but was home for Christmas, landing on the day of her birthday. Jess had arranged a big party with a rented room for it. Laura's family had arranged a family dinner at their house for her. A few of our friends told Laura that, although they would be celebrating with Jess, they would go to the airport to collect her and bring her to her parents' house. Laura planned to join Jess' party later on. It was all arranged. Laura's parents thought it was a lovely gesture and Laura was really happy. They had planned to get balloons and give her the group present we had put together for her. In college, the girls told Jess the plan, and because of the time of Laura's flight they may be an hour late to her party, but they would absolutely still make it. I wasn't there to see it firsthand, but they told me that it was like looking at a 3-year-old and not a 21-year-old. She stomped her feet on the ground. It's my party. I've planned it for months. I can't believe you're doing this to me. They calmly explained they weren't doing anything to her, but doing something kind for their friend who they care about equally. She continued in her hissy fit, if you're going to be late don't bother showing up etc. One of the girls in the moment decided to call her on her sheet and said fine. If you don't want us to go get Laura from the airport on her 21st birthday, you have to call her parents and explain to them why we are bailing on the plan. Jess proceeded to take out her phone and call Laura's parents and tell them that they needed to go to the airport because the girls would be at her party instead. I don't know if this counts as a temper tantrum per se, but to make this as short as I can, my friend's ex-wife broke their court agreement. He took her to court. She denied him his child for his weekend. He took her to court again. She was told to give the child like the agreement states. She got pissed she lost in court, so she accused me of molesting her child to prevent the father from having his court-appointed visitation. The father lives with me, and I have never once spoken a single word to the mother, and I'm 100% sure she has never once seen me in the 7 years I have known the father. She filed 2 police reports, 1 report with DCF, and an injunction telling me to leave my house. No joke, she listed my house as a place that I'm not allowed to go, because she/her daughter go there. The daughter is only here on the weekend once every other week. She has taken the child to several trauma therapists. One therapist she told I rapped the child. It's written down in her notes that the father obtained legally. She has taken the child to the ER to have a full rap exam done on a 10-year-old child with delayed mental status, learning disability combined with very poor upbringing from the mother. She has hired a lawyer which then she failed to pay and is being sued by. She sweet talked a judge that has never heard of me, nor was he part of the injunction that was filed on me to take the recent agreement between the father and mother that states she will not break any more agreements, and had him handwrite on the side that I'm to stay away from the child. Basically he wrote a restraining order on a court document that I'm not tied to in any way, shape or form. All of this because she was taken to court twice for breaking court agreements. The first agreement she broke was an agreement that the father pays a monthly amount of money that is used for the children. At the time it was 2, but one is over 18 now, to do after school activities. And that at the end of the year, she provides receipts that show how much each activity was, and he would pay the difference. Well, at the end of the year she handed him a handwritten list for several thousands. Mind you, she lives on disability and child support. This list contained things like $300 cash gift for son for his birthday, $2,000 for cruise. He refused to pay it because there was no receipts, and some of these claims are downright wrong or impossible. So he took her to court about it, and the court said that the after school agreement is void and that he has to pay nothing and will no longer pay for after school activities. That's when she refused to let him have his kid as stated by the court for his custody time. Sadly, and this is something that everyone needs to know, and it needs to change legally, he called the police on her each time, and they told him that he needs to take her to court, and that they cannot force her to give up the child as they cannot get involved in that kind of issue. So he took her to court over her not letting him have his child. She was told to give the child or she will face jail time. Boom, I get accused, and the whole shitstorm opens up. TLDR, a friend's ex-wife got owned in court twice by him, so to get back at him, she accused me of molesting her daughter, whom he has every other weekend visitation with at my house where he lives. And before anyone asks, she has stuck with her guns on this. She will not back down, because she will get faking wrecked by the law, and him playing the waiting game to strike back at her. Working at a hotel, these are pretty common, but the one I always fall back on is this. We had to move a guest from a queen room to a king with a sofa, sleeper and rollaway bed. So from 2 beds to 3. This guy brought his wife, son, and daughter. So, I explained to him now there are 3 beds, but I'm still sorry about the inconvenience of having to switch his room type. Guy goes ballistic. Says his son will now have to sleep on the floor, and what is he supposed to do? Sleep with his daughter? Oh wait, I'm sorry, they were not his children, they were adults. He stormed around my lobby trying to barge into my back office saying he is going to stay down here until it is fixed. Blah blah blah. No matter how many times I explained to him how the sleepy situation could work, he too focused on the blasphemy of sleeping with his daughter. Dumbass, you sleep with your wife, your daughter gets a pull-out, and your son gets a roll away. And he focused on the fact that I called his grown adults his children. They are not children. Fuck your damn offspring. Anyway, he got a free room. I had to write him a promise note to promise him it would be worked out in the morning and he could change to Queens. This faking guy. His son came down later and apologized for his crazy dad. I'm getting in late to this, but I've always wanted to tell this story. I was maybe 13 and already kind of a smartass. VHS and VCRs just became a thing, and my dad and I went to a Blockbuster Video to look around. The selections back then weren't the greatest, since the technology was so new, but it was still neat to be able to rent a movie and take it home. So my dad and I milled around the store looking for anything along with maybe 6 other families. That is a huge Runan sentence. Just then a woman came in the store waving a videotape around and screaming her head off. Satanists, witches, heathens, you're all going to hell, and slams the video down on the counter. Everyone stopped and all eyes were in her. Her spotlight was lit, and it was her time to shine. She had obviously seen something on that video that got under her feathers, and she wanted her 15 minutes. With her planned and rehearsed speech on the tip of her tongue, I interrupted. Dad, I said louder than necessary. I don't care what that video is, but can we please rent it? The other customer's shock turned to giggles then to laughter. Her spotlight was just stolen by some dumbass kid in a Black Flag t-shirt. Venom boiled from her eyes as she stomped her way toward me. My dad has never hit a woman, but he stepped up between me and the Venom lady. His back was to me, so I can't swear to it, but he must have had a look that meant danger, because Venom lady stopped, screamed heathens one last time and stormed out. The movie, Equinox. Best one I've ever witnessed was at work. I work at a bank and a lady and her husband come in and proceed to the teller line. She asks my teller what the balance of her savings account was and is told it's something like $3,000. She replies with "No, you wrong, check again." So since we are looking at her account and can't really check again, my teller just stalls for a minute and politely tells her the same balance. After repeating this scenario a few times for her, she becomes very upset and tells us that the actual balance should be somewhere near $13,000. At this point I get myself involved and go through her transactions to find out where the money went. Long story short, her husband had been taking large amounts of it out as cash. My guess is he was gambling it away, since there were other casino charges on their checking account, and hadn't told her about it. This is where things got fun. The wife basically exploded, screaming at the top of her lungs how that was her money, and he had no right and how she needed that money. She began pounding her fists on our teller window, "Don't do that in a bank," and screaming at us for letting him have the money. After a few minutes of this, she tears her wig off and throws it across the lobby and storms around our branch, slamming chairs into walls and hitting pretty much anything in her path. Again, I don't recommend doing this in a bank. Eventually she runs out of energy and falls to the ground, where she takes her shirt off and starts rolling on the ground, beating her fists on the carpet. She remained this way for about 10 minutes until the cops, that I had called after she started hitting things, arrived. They finally got her to stop screaming and throwing things by threat of taser and slapped a trespassing charge on her, so basically she isn't allowed in my bank or any of its locations for quite a while. I also had all of her accounts shut down, so that'll be fun for her. My dad had a freak out the Thanksgiving before last. I was still living at home with him at the time, along with 2 of my 3 brothers. Relations with dad had been waning progressively over the course of 10 years after my parents' divorce. He had always been an alcoholic, but the added stress of caring for 3 sons through an economic downturn, while still trying to put them all through college and live the affluent life he used to, really drove him further and further into the bottle. Apparently, though I never received an accurate number, he lost some $100K during the recession, which, had he not kids to care for, would have resulted in his suicide. Couple this with severe emotional instability brought on, also, from the divorce, and dealing with kids whom, in his view, were ungrateful leeches who didn't care about him despite all he did. So we paint a picture of a poor drunkard whose only remaining value in life is his kids, a factor that he tends to forget when inebriated. Anyway, this Thanksgiving had some promise. My oldest brother was coming by, my dad's girlfriend and her kids were going to be there, everyone was going to cook something, all very potluck. But family gatherings tend to be a minefield, and a bomb was stepped upon. Due a failure to communication, my oldest brother did not bring the turkey. He is a professional chef, so we all, I suppose, assumed he would bring the main course. This info was news to him, as I called him regarding it prior to his arrival. When dad found out, he flipped. Can't have Thanksgiving without a turkey, after all. His tirade lapsed into angry profanity and denunciations of our intelligence. He began blaming my oldest brother, still absent though he be. I felt I had to step in and claimed the blame for myself. He reeled on me and gave me his guff. Meanwhile, my brothers, my dad's girlfriend and her kids have not to do but bear silent witness. He shouts at them to find a restaurant that is serving turkey so we can pick some up. There were of course none open. He shouts at his girlfriend that he just wants to leave. She protests and tries to keep him at the house. I took her aside and asked her just to take him away, which she thankfully did. I remember fondly my brother turning to the kids and saying, "Happy Thanksgiving." Luckily, I had baked a ham. So my brothers and I and my dad's girlfriend's kids had ham and few other sides for Thanksgiving. It was pretty good. I heard later on my dad went to a bar and had nachos. I was at a deli / market the other day, local place, not like a Walmart / Publix / Kroger chain, and the guy in front of me was purchasing strawberries in cartons that were on sale. $3 for $5. A clerk rang them up, and they showed up at $1.67 / carton, which brought his total to $5.01. Strawberry guy absolutely lost his mind before the clerk could even say $5. SG. No. No, 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 no. The sign says 345, not 501. $5. Clark. SG. It says 345. This seems like a very obvious thing according to the sign, but no, it says 501. Clark. Sir, you can pay $5 and move on with your evening. SG. No, I want to know why it says 501. This is elementary. Manager. Sir, what seems to be the problem here? SG. I looked at the sign. The sign said 345, and I just got rang up here for 501. This seems like an elementary thing. 345, but oh no, it's manager. Sir, she did nothing wrong here. Do you know what else is an elementary thing? Not yelling and being a decent human being inside our store. Either pay without another word or you can leave without your strawberries. SG refused to pay without knowing why it said $5.01, so the manager took his strawberries, gave them to an associate to have them restocked, and escorted SG out of the store. Manager to clerk, you know, if that's the worst customer you have for the rest of your shift, you're going to have a pretty easy night, eh? I worked in a Dairy Queen drive-thru for about 2 years. We had a lot of questionable characters ranging from creepy to funny, but this lady was my favorite. She ordered a medium blizzard with nothing in it, except pecans and maraschino cherries, an unbelievably bizarre order. We just charged her for a normal blizzard and made it. When she got up to the window, my coworker took her money and handed her the blizzard. She took one look at it and said there were no cherries in it. Now, blizzards with cherries are not traditionally made with maraschino cherries. They are made with a cherry sauce that's a lot darker once it's blended. We double checked with her before we made it, but she very specifically requested maraschino cherries, which are usually put on top of sundaes and banana splits. In the 2 years I worked there, she was the only customer who ever asked for maraschino cherries in a blizzard. It was weird. So with the maraschino cherries, the color didn't come out as pink as it would with the normal cherry topping. My coworker literally leaned out of the window, grabbed the spoon of the blizzard she was holding, and started digging through her ice cream and counting the cherries out loud for her. She stopped him after he got to like 8 cherries and told him it wasn't enough and she wanted more. He told her she could certainly have more, but he'd have to charge her 59 cents for additional toppings, which personally, I think is a pretty reasonable price. She didn't agree. She threw the blizzard at my coworker and drove off. We thought it was absolutely hilarious. I don't know how this woman had such terrible aim when she was only like 3 feet away, but it hit his arm and fell on the outside of the window, so there wasn't too much of a mess. We had a good laugh about it with the person in the car behind her who saw the whole thing. I felt so bad for her kid though who didn't get his ice cream cone because his mom is an unreasonable hag. Best part is she already paid for it and then got so mad she drove off with nothing. Most of these stories are about angry customers and unreasonable parents. Mine is a little different and isn't really a temper tantrum per se. The biggest public freakout I ever witnessed was by a woman, Jane, who after 15 years of employment was being fired for legitimate performance reasons. The news was delivered in a private conference room and Jane seemed to take the rejection fairly well. No tears, no anger, no outbursts, just silence and head nods. It was only when we started the walk of shame to go collect her personal belonging that things went south. By the way, my job in this interaction was to act as an observer/witness and to handle some of the security needs like shutting down system accounts and collecting company assets. I trailed her and her manager, John, to her former office. As we got about halfway there I noticed that her pace started to accelerate and that a gap was quickly being created between herself, John, and myself in the trailing position. 10 steps or so later she was speed walking and it was becoming clear that something was about to go down. We made the last turn and the office was in sight. Her pace quickened again, and Jane was now jogging. Jane was not a small person, and so what happened next was one part hilarious, and one part frightening. I called out for her to slow down. As soon as the words left my mouth, Jane began a full sprint towards the doorway, taking out trash cans, hurdling banker boxes, and knocking a huge stack of folders out of a former coworker's hand. John and I now fully realize that the situation was dissolving fast, and began our pursuit. We have no idea why she is running, and we have no idea what her intent was. What we did know is that this very large older woman was suddenly channeling Lalo Jones. The scene was completely surreal. The agility and determination displayed by this woman was unnatural, and there was a part of me that was completely awestruck by what I was witnessing. Then John stopped on a dime and shouted stop at the top of his lungs. Jane didn't even break pace. She clearly had a goal in mind and wasn't going to be deterred. John then yelled that he was going to get security and made a sharp left into the nearest office with a phone. I continued in pursuit and was gaining on her quickly, but home base was just steps away at this point, and with a final push Jane tumbled across the finish line and crashed violently to the floor. She clumsily turned and lunged for the door. I was almost there and was reaching out with my foot to block the opening when we finally made eye contact. Jane's face was completely flushed. She was gasping for air and the tears/sweat mix had smeared her makeup across her face. I didn't make it. The door slammed closed, the lock engaged, and Jane wedged her back against the door. I still had no idea what her intent was. Were there drugs in the office? Booze? A gun? What the fuck is going on here, I kept asking myself. I didn't have my master key on me, and even if I did, the situation was now escalated to the point that actual authorities were required. The front wall of the office was glass, so it was easy enough for her to see that I was not going to attempt entry. Then she curled up in a fetal position and started sobbing. The kind of sobbing that comes from deep down inside and requires every muscle in the body. She was shaking uncontrollably and was beginning to hyperventilate. Now I could see John exiting the office. He used to call security. I called out to him that he should get an ambulance en route as well. Then came the wailing. The sounds Jane made in the next few minutes are something I'll never ever forget. I can hear them in my head right now, as if I was still standing there outside that office. It stayed like this until security showed up a little while later. Jane didn't make another move. She just cried and wailed and rocked back and forth on the ground. Once security arrived, they unlocked the door, entered the office and cleared the room of any weapons. No one was angry. No one shouted or was aggressive with Jane in any way. We could all see that this woman was in pain and at the moment didn't appear to be a threat to anyone but herself. We all basically just watched this poor woman suffer until the paramedics arrived. After a while, the medics helped Jane onto a gurney, got her some oxygen, and wheeled her out of the building. The crisis was over for us. A few days later, John and I were called into ours to finalize our statements. Once the paperwork was complete, we got the full story. The Christmas prior, Jane's husband had passed from a very aggressive form of lung cancer. Earlier that summer, Jane's only son and her only grandchild had been killed in a boating accident. The week of the incident, Jane had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. None of us had any idea that any of this had occurred. She had managed to keep it all a secret from everyone at the office. After all that suffering alone, being fired was the thing that finally pushed her over the edge and broke her down. Jane passed a few months later. John and I were 2 of maybe 10 people who attended her funeral. Happened about 5 days ago actually. I work in a local supermarket in England, and we've had to change all the packaging on our cigarettes from their usual colorful ones to black packaging with a picture of someone dying or lung disease. We've also gotten rid of packs of 10s and small pouches of things that is 12.5 g amber leaf or golden Virginia. So I'm behind till. Boring old sheet. Serving people. Yeah, I know the usual. But then a regular comes in. We all call him Bongos as he always has a pair of bongos on him. Nice man but acts well spoken and above what he is and thinks he's some kind of intellect mastermind. The following conversation is 100% real and filmed in front of a live studio audience. Me, here bud, I'm afraid we're all out of amber leaf. We've only got 30s or 50s left. Bongo, what do you mean you're out? M, well, we're out. We've none left. B, gold leaf. M, nope sorry B, alright well I'll take a 12.5 of cutter's choice. Opens door quickly and grabs the backy, closing it there we are. B, that's illegal that. M, sorry? B, what you've just done is illegal. All that black packaging. It's not public knowledge as to why you've done this. Note, it's been on the news for the past 5 months now, and will be in full effect as of May I think, which is why I've written to the council about this, and why I've asked for a full explanation, and when I find out about it, I'll let you know. M, well, clearly it's legal sir, else we wouldn't. B, no it isn't. I work hard for my money, and what to do with it, so I won't be letting you or anyone else tell me how to spend it M. Alright B, I'm serious I'll sue. M, do you want to talk to my manager then? B, no, I just want my cheap faking backy is that so much to faking ask? M, and that's what I'm giving you. That's £2.99 please. After this he left the store and didn't come back until later where he apologized to me saying that he had had a stressful day. I've only been there for 2 months, but I've loads of stories. TLDR man thinks he knows everything. Tells us he'll sue my workplace for not letting the public know about the changes to ciggies that's been on the news for the past 5 months. Gonna get buried, but a former cowwalker, at my first serving job comes to mind. I came in, checked the floor chart for my section, and asked a different coworker some mundane question as I clocked and I had been in the building for less than 2 minutes. A comes around the corner and lays into me because a table that wasn't in my section and had been sat before I arrived was waiting for drinks. As she's flipping out, guests walk up, so I excuse myself, wait till they leave, and ask her not to do that in front of customers again. She loses her sheet. Hauls all the servers into the kitchen for a come to Jesus. She isn't a supervisor or manager, just a server back from maternity leave on a power trip, about doing our jobs, and not standing around like Murdoch Jones. My eyes roll so hard I swear I hear pins falling behind my corneas, and walk off, because fuck this beach. Grab some food to run, and she gets in my face screaming about how I'm a lazy, worthless piece of shit, blah blah blah. I briefly consider throwing the omelette I'm holding in her face, but instead do the smartest thing I could have done given that I'm literally a second away from decorating the floor with what teeth she still possessed. I calmly walk out front, retrieve my coat, and clock out, texting my boss to let him know he's more than welcome to fire me, because I'm not going to jail over her. Apparently after I left she flipped out on another server in the kitchen, before taking off in our boss's truck for 2 hours. Didn't get fired, but ended up quitting, because our boss wasn't much better. One no call no show. Better text the entire staff, to tell them how replaceable and useless they are fuck I hop. Well, a customer, if you will. A woman who has lived in the area for a while, and has some mental health issues. She came into my store, let's call it an automotive crusade store, attempting to return some brake rotors and pads which she purchased at an affiliated store, where they're already in. Well, first. Well, yep, we sell 'em, but the money didn't go in my till and it's not coming out of it, so I told her that she'd have to take them back to the store where she purchased them for a possible refund. She proceeded to attempt to argue with me by spelling out words one at a time, letter by letter, at the top of her voice in a furious shout, with a look on her face like she was ready to explode. I tried talking over her a few times but nothing seemed to faze her. Not really being sure what to do at that point, I listened for about 20 seconds with a blank expression on my face. She was ranting the whole time, and then for some reason I slammed my hand on the counter and flung a can of glass cleaner which was sitting right there at a stack of boxes at maximum velocity. What the fuck? Not sure why I did this, but while shouting hey, it snapped her out of it, so I said, here's what we're doing. I'm carrying these out and setting them by your car. You're free to return these too, or do whatever you'd like with them. Do not return to this location ever again. Thank you. She was silent the whole time. I walked back inside and realized I was actually shaking a bit. None of my employees were anywhere to be found. LMAO. I poked my head in the machine shop and there they all were in the corner by the wash sink and desk, kinda peeking out as I opened the door. A customer, a regular, was back there too. Thanks for leaving me out there to defend myself, dudes. I called and warned a few stores in the area. 2 out of 5 reported she'd already been in, with similar antics. I've seen her around town a few times, since but not recently. This was 3 years ago. She hasn't been back to the store, thankfully. It was my birthday last month, and in my family that means you get to pick the restaurant the family goes to. I have picked the same restaurant every year, since 2011, so it's never a surprise. It's not a fancy restaurant or anything, it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. My dad has diabetes, and happens to be a serious homebody. He also has no sense of self-control. My dad did not bring his glucose meter with him, or his insulin, and he did not take any before we left home either. I suggested to him, before we left home, that he should probably take some long-acting insulin, if he wasn't going to bring anything with him. The kicker is my dad never brings his diabetes supplies with him, anywhere, so if he ever suffers from any diabetic problems he has to guess what's wrong. My mother and I theorize that it's how he gets to control when we leave, because obviously we can't refuse if it's a medical emergency and he needs to go home and have his insulin. So after 8, as though he were 3 people, he proceeded to sit there and become sullen and sick and complain that we shouldn't have to wait for the people who came late. Some of my family had to drive for a while to get there, and that we shouldn't do family birthday dinners anymore. He said this loudly enough that the families at other tables were looking at us. There was awkward silence at our table for a while. Then his 85-year-old mother had to go to the restroom. She needs help in the washroom, so I walked her there and helped. It took time, maybe 15 minutes. When we got back to the table my dad was nowhere to be found. He had had another outburst and had decided to leave the building. The entire family was sitting there in silence just waiting for us to get back so that they could say goodbye and GTFO. There were 11 people at that dinner table, and it was the 50-something homebody diabetic who stormed out and made a scene. He didn't pay for his own dinner. He didn't bother to walk his mother into her house. He stayed in the car while I did it, and when we got home he proceeded to bitch about how bad an idea it was to go to a goddamn buffet, the same one we have been going to for 6 years. He didn't suggest going somewhere else, just bitched about the fact that I always choose to go there. He is not invited to my next birthdays. It was fucking embarrassing, and I was only there for half of it. TLDR, my diabetic father never brings his glucose meter or insulin with him. We went to a restaurant for my birthday and he ate like a pig and then complained about how stupid and bad for his health it was that we went out to dinner at all. I worked the counter at a BBQ restaurant for a while, and one week we had a Gruppen. $10 off for an order of $10 or more after 4 PM. This is really important. We had people all the time try and use it at lunch, but when we showed them the fine print they usually relented. Except one guy during lunch on the last day of the promotion. This man was about 6 feet 4 inches 270 lbs. I was running food and the girl taking orders was no more than 5 feet 2 inches and $1.20. The man tries to use his Gruppen, even before finishing his order, and she told him the terms on the Gruppen. He exploded. Hear this grown man yelling at full volume at a tiny 19-year-old. I calmly took her by the shoulders and moved her to the side and took over the situation. A little about me. I'm 6 feet 260 at the time, in good shape, preparing for an MMA fight. I had been training for several years at this point. So back to the story. The guy continues to yell and cuss me out, and I keep a neutral expression the whole time, repeating the information on the Gruppen. Finally he asks me if I want to take this outside. I look at Dave, our head chef and co-manager, and he nods sick of this guy's shit too. I replied, fine, let me clock out first. The man went white. I have never seen someone backpedal and apologize so fast in my life. He finalized his order and went to his table. I brought him his food and he mumbled a second apology and left a $10 tip. Nothing too out of the ordinary, but my friend let his girlfriend's dog out back of his house and the pup snuck through the fence and escaped. While me and him are calling for the dog around the neighborhood, his new next door neighbor, hears us calling for the dog and kindly comes outside with a few flashlights ready to help. So it's me, new neighbor, and my friend walking down the road calling for the dog. My friend is now moving into panic mode and begins to call his girlfriend. She answers the phone and my friend, 28 years of age, boisterous, and smart-mouthed, decided to tell his girlfriend that he lost her dog with a high-pitched series of squeals and cries that sounded like Tommy Davidson and the Tasmanian Devil fighting over a coke bag pitched up 3 octaves. It's almost impossible to recreate due to how intense and erratic the noises he made were, but doors exist so nothing's impossible. At this point, my friend just beat how to give the worst first impression to your next door neighbor ever in legend mode. I've known this guy for a while and I never had heard anything like it. So me and new neighbor are kind of bamboozled by the tonality of my friend and try to see if he had somehow physically hurt himself walking on the road, but my friend was legitimately having a serious tantrum like none we had ever seen and continued squealing and cooing to his girlfriend on the phone like a blubbering little kid at the doctor's office. Spoiler alert, we eventually found the dog and awkwardly enough my friend and new neighbor haven't mentioned or talked about his tantrum once, and I now question the validity of my friend's crisis communication skills. This will definitely get buried, but it is too crazy to not share with you. I have told this on Reddit before, but it fits here. So I work in a privately owned assistance suite building, sort of like a hostel/hospitalized shelter type of thing. We all get assigned various jobs mostly based on position and I usually room keep, or help load in, or organize stock and food. I've been working here on and off for 2 years. It's usually pretty calm besides for lunch hour, and it's on the outskirts, so there's never really any trouble outside of the rooms. But one day was horrible. Background: a month and a half ago my boss had hired this one guy, we'll call him Cameron, that was 19. He was okay, I never talked to him much, but never heard anything bad about him. At the time I worked 10 AM to 5 PM, and he was working 11 AM to 3 PM around a schedule or school or something. Over the course of a few weeks I noticed that I barely ever saw him during his shifts after the supervisor sent him off to do something. That day, he was sent with me to stock the coffee counter with a cart of supplies, and a while later I looked back and realized that it had been over 5 minutes, and I had already stocked cupboards and half the counter, but Cameron hadn't done anything, he wasn't there actually. The supervisor was on break, so I knew he didn't get sent to another task, so I asked if anyone had seen him. A 15-year-old staff member I talk to on a daily basis, let's call him Tyler, came to help me finish up. I asked Tyler if he knew where Cameron went. Tyler said he's probably in his cubby, and then proceeded to show me where it was. Apparently Cameron had created a cubby for himself about 4x6 feet behind some old shelving units in the back of the storage room. He had stolen a heated blanket, pillow and various food items out of the food court stock, had thumbtacked baseball cards and whatnot onto the wall, and he had been hanging out there for the majority of his shifts for over a month. Checking in with various managers at 30 to 45-minute intervals so as to be seen by someone. I convinced Tyler that someone needed to be informed about this. As we tried leaving the storage room, Cameron decided to start flinging things towards us, including giant cans of foods and various tools and even a parts of a bed frame, as he screamed things like, "You aren't going anywhere, beaches." Someone heard the ruckus, probably an angry resident, since only 2 other people were working on the other side of the building, and a manager was called in. This was Cameron's 3rd or 4th offense, so the manager immediately fired him. Cameron proceeded to rip his shirt in half and start crying while screaming, "Why?" over and over again at the top of his lungs. We all then guided him out, but he didn't like that at all. He started slamming his hands on the nearest brick wall and threw a table and some shelving units down to the floor, so Tyler and I had to get hold of him while the manager called the cops and went over the loudspeaker for residents to lock their doors. Tyler and I, slightly forcefully, hopped onto Cameron's arms and escorted him to the lobby. We got him out of the building, where he continued screaming and crying while beating his chest and hawking lodges on our windows until the cops came. I visited him after the incident in an institute to check on him. I had to explain to him twice why he was fired. TLDR, a crazy guy got fired, so he threw things, ripped his shirt, broke down, hawked lodges before needing to be told twice why he was fired. Reading these comments is making me kind of sad. A lot of these instances sound like some manifestations of mental illness. Now mental illness hard to deal with, even when you are fully aware you have a problem. Just recently I've been overly depressed, stressed out, overwhelmed and exhausted from life in general. There's a lot going on in my life, from new job, to being a new parent, to having a different and sometimes difficult living situation. I feel like I have to take care of literally everything. Some of that pressure I know is self-imposed, but it's there nonetheless. A few nights ago I woke up at 1 AM and couldn't sleep. Mind you, I was already tired. I went downstairs to sleep on the couch. When I went downstairs, the dogs got excited and wanted to go outside, to go to the bathroom. I leash one up, take her out, and came back in. I proceed to leash the other dog up, and she proceeds to pee on the carpet. She sometimes has submissive urination issues. I proceeded to get the carpet cleaner and start cleaning. In the process of vacuuming up the poo, I lose it. I proceeded to smash the nozzle against the wall a few times and throw the cleaner down the hall. It was just the straw that broke the camel's back. So there's my tantrum. I hate myself when those moments happen. Life sometimes is overwhelming for some people. Needless to say, my wife heard what was going on and came downstairs. She asked if I was alright and what happened. I proceeded to break down crying. She hugged me and told me everything would be alright. Honestly, I don't know if I would still be here if it wasn't for my understanding and compassionate wife. Sometimes all people need is someone to ask if they are okay and give them a hug. I think the world needs a lot less criticism and a lot more compassion. Anyways, thanks for indulging in my little anecdote. This one was my upstairs neighbor. She's around 30 years old, and I'm pretty sure she's the mistress of some old rich guy. He regularly visits for 1 hour sexy time and they regularly have fights with her, storming around the apartment in her high heels, and she's usually dressed like a hooker. So I was doing my laundry in the laundry room of my apartment building when suddenly my upstairs neighbor storms in, screaming at me at the top of her lungs, "Did you steal my shoes?" I'm completely perplexed and say, "No, why would I steal your shoes? Did someone break into your apartment?" To which she continues screaming, "No, you faker stole them from outside my apartment." I tell her I didn't steal anything. Why don't you put your shoes inside your apartment and call the police or something? Which causes her to go completely mental, screaming at me, storming around, going, "How could I possibly fit all those shoes inside my apartment? Give me back my shoes." Luckily, I was done putting my laundry in my laundry basket, so I just told her again that I didn't steal her shoes and good luck in finding them, and went back to my apartment. She kept yelling in the hallway, though after 5 to 10 minutes she apparently found another poor soul to yell at and forgot about me. A family member to me has made some very bad decisions in life, and he is pretty old in his adulthood. This was my first time meeting him, and he seemed really nice at first. We had dinner, played board games, watched some Bob Marley documentary. It was a great night. It was obvious that he was high though, because he kept laughing at everything, and he couldn't keep a conversation more than 20 seconds. Eventually, he is saying his goodbyes, and he shakes my hand again saying goodbye and nice to meet you. He then goes to his stepdad and says, "Except for you, you piece of shit." Things just escalate from there, and he goes sociopath on us, and starts talking about how he hates us, and how his life was always terrible. He is now pacing around the house talking about how he was put in a mental institution when he was young, and it ruined his entire life. Then a lot of what he says is just sort of gibberish, and I couldn't really understand, but he kept bringing up his uncle name, who I didn't know at the time, but now I know that he is in jail for pedophilia. He kept saying he wanted to visit him at the jail, since he doesn't have a car, and he then stormed upstairs, and then back downstairs with 2 Ziploc bags of weed, and then storms outside, where he then called his friend to pick him up. After this all happened, I find out that he has been like this his entire life, and that he is legally allowed to smoke a certain amount of weed, because he is a lot calmer when he is high. The reason he freaked out on us is because his high was wearing off. I honestly feel bad for him because he can't get his life together and his entire family has lost all hope for him and they put all of his stuff from his room on the front porch. TLDR. So Shia Path family members high wears off and he freaks the fuck out at family dinner. There's a legend around my office about a former employee. Our office has a tongue-in-cheek trophy known as the Turkey Awards. It's given to anyone who does a dumb, and we all joke about it. Typically it goes to people who sends their expense report to the plotter, or who hid reply all to a company-wide email, or spills their coffee on drawings they were about to send to the client, etc. Everyone had fun with it, and didn't take receiving it too seriously. Everyone except Frank, we'll call him. Frank was just a scatterbrained klutz who was making little mistakes that earned him the Turkey Award up to a couple times a week. One day he got so fed up with the trophy and threw it in the trash saying I dare someone to call me dumb again among other things. Well, Dave, who sits on the other side of the cube from him and happens to be a pretty big guy, decided to push his button saying I think you're dumb for throwing that away. Frank lost his sheet. He swept all of his papers off his desk, jumped up onto it yelling obscenities at Dave, took off his glasses and threw them down, knocking out the lenses and sending them bouncing. Then he faking leaps across the cubicle wall onto Dave as he's standing up and starts wailing on him. Dave threw him off and proceeded to keep him at a distance. The Turkey Award took a bit of a hiatus until the Thanksgiving after Frank left, and we got a stuffed turkey that took over as the new trophy. I used to work at a well-known pharmacy. I was ringing a woman who was getting a variety of prescriptions, mainly psychological medications, without insurance. Needless to say, it was very expensive. I told her about our medication program that would save money on her prescriptions, and it was $15 to sign up. Well, I misspoke. It was actually $20, which I don't realize until later. This was during the busiest time of the day in the pharmacy, so I had to sign her up, run the prescriptions through the program and ring her up as quickly as possibly. The program saved her a significant amount of money. However, I ring up the program and I politely say, oops, I'm sorry, it's actually $20. Is that okay? It wasn't. She proceeds to start screaming about it being an extra $5, even though she was about to pay a shit ton extra for her medications, plus I happen to see a $20 bill in her wallet. She yells that she wants to speak to the pharmacy manager. So manager goes to her and tries to explain, but customer was not having it. The customer is screaming so loudly that she is inadvertently spitting in my manager's face, and nobody in the very busy pharmacy can hear the person next to them or on the phone. Also, she is pointing at me and screaming repeatedly how that bitch lied to me. Manager calls the police while the store manager, they usually stay in front unless we tell them to help us in the pharmacy, on duty at the time, hears the commotion and comes back to try to escort her outside. She would not leave. She continues screaming, and so store manager tried to lead her out by the arm. Bad idea. She starts shrieking how he assaulted her and that she was going to press charges against him. Eventually she leaves and he does have to go to court. I'm shook, but my manager promises I never have to see her or help that woman again. Saw her about a month later. For some reason she was allowed to come back to our pharmacy. All this over an extra $5. TLDR, woman throws a huge faking fit because something cost $5 more than I quoted her. When I was in college, I used to work at a Hess gas station. Now we lived in the classy part of town, but still we managed to get all of the crazes. Every once in a while I would work an overpass just to help out my boss, and we had a lot of regular drunks who would come in during my shift. One particular drunk decided he was going to come past the time when I was allowed to sell beer, 3 to 6 AM. Not only was he drunk, but he also drove to get to our particular station. He grabs a 30 rack of Coors and proceeds to stumble up to the register. I then politely inform him that between the hours of 3 to 6 AM I cannot sell him alcohol. I had already written down his license plate number as I was going to call the cops to let them know a man was driving intoxicated. When all of a sudden this man began screaming at me that this is not Nazi Germany and I have to sell him beer. If I don't sell him beer, he tells me he's going to call the state troopers on me. I think to myself, well, this will save me the trouble of having to call the police myself. So this guy at 3:30 in the morning calls 911 and begins screaming at the dispatcher I'm refusing to sell him beer. He repeatedly states that he is an American citizen and has the right to buy beer whenever the fuck he feels like it. He then hangs up the phone, begins calling me a cunt, and starts throwing lead matches at me. Needless to say, 10 minutes later this guy's getting handcuffed and put in the back of a police car while screaming, "What the fuck did I do? This stupid beach won't let me buy beer." It made my damn night. Edit. I suck at spelling. This was last summer. Fireworks are legal in my county, so almost everyone has fireworks on the 4th of July. Each year, we go to a friend's house to light off fireworks. His neighbor is a faking asshole from what we heard, but we never saw him on the 4th, probably because he was out of town. Well, not last year. We were lighting off some of our smaller fireworks on road in front of our driveway when he pulls up and gets out. He tells us not to light fireworks off on his lawn. We weren't even touching his lawn. His house was on the other side of the road, so we tell him we won't. Apparently that wasn't good enough. He gets up in our faces, pointing at us, swearing at us, threatening to punch us, right in front of one of the guests' little kids nonetheless. This was completely unprovoked. None of us were being rude or condescending to him. He storms off and goes to passive-aggressively mow his lawn while glaring at us like a giant 50-something-year-old man baby. There were other neighbors lighting off mortars. I wouldn't be surprised if he had been scouting the entire neighborhood to be a dick. A couple hours later, after the grand finale, his mom, or whatever, some old crotch hag, crawled out of her burrow to scold us. She stamped her feet and huffed and stomped and yelled. Again, we weren't doing anything illegal. Fireworks are totally legal, and we weren't the only ones in the neighborhood lighting them off. Fireworks aren't a new thing here. These two were control freaks who knew better. I have two stories about this, and they both involve car accidents. I live in Georgia and this happened years ago. My husband, boyfriend at the time, and I were in the Six Flags parking lot. I was trying to pull out to exit the park, but there was a lot of traffic. I had to cross two lanes in the parking lot to get in the exit lane. Only one lane was open. This one truck noticed and stopped, so I could go, and since the other lane was closed, I waved my thanks and went. The guy behind him had a problem with that, I guess. He swooped around the truck and into the lane that was closed to get around him. I didn't see him until he slammed into my car. He then got out and started screaming at me. I mean, ripped off his seatbelt, got out and came toward the car. He was screaming so loudly and got so close to the car that I could see spit coming out of his mouth. He called me a bitch, said I shouldn't drive, blah blah blah. The guy in the truck that let me out got out and started yelling at the guy. My husband was pissed and started screaming at the guy that it wasn't even my fault, and then I started laughing so hard because of how ridiculous this was, and it stopped my husband from getting out of the car. I'm glad that he didn't, because that could have escalated to something big. Anyhow, security came and the cops were called, and he got in trouble. Second time, my husband was in the army and we were living in DC. My husband and I lived at Feet Belvoir in housing that you could only get to by leaving the base. My light turned green and I turned left onto the main road. This old lady pulled out of the gas station slamming into the side of my car. I immediately called 911 and told them what happened. While I was talking to the operator, the old lady gets out and starts yelling, "Why did you hit me? Why would you hit an old lady, you bitch?" My husband got out to calm her because it was clearly her fault, but we didn't know if she was okay or had something else going on. She turns around, gets in her car, slams the door and guns it. I didn't even get a license plate, but the 911 operator heard it all. The cops showed up and I described the car. A few minutes later they had stopped a car that matched my description, and it had obviously been in an accident. She lost it on the cop. She actually told the cop that, since she had left the scene, she shouldn't have been pulled over, and proceeded to call the cops and myself every name in the book. She had a full-blown meltdown. The cop had gone to his car, and when he came back to me, he was laughing so hard. He told me what happened, and it was hilarious to him. I did not think it was that funny. She didn't have a license. She didn't have insurance. I had just gotten hit hard by a car, so hard it spun us. I got screamed at by a woman who thought I somehow had gone out of my way to hit her. When she hit me, I was a little freaked out. Being in an accident is a little scary anyhow, but having an old woman think you were some kind of young assassin who specialized in hurting/killing the elderly. My husband still laughs about it, because when she came out of that car freaking out, he said I just stared straight ahead. He said I was shaking, and the look on my face when she was screaming, the look on my face when she got in the car and left, and the look on my face when the cop was laughing at what the lady was saying was hilarious to him. Then, when the cop pulled off, he said I still just sat there staring straight ahead with my license in my hand, and that I wasn't saying a word. Maybe not what you were looking for, but they had full-blown tantrums. The guy at Six Flags was even stomping his feet, and I think that's what made me start laughing at the situation. This happened on Halloween, when I was about 13 or 14. My dad was arguing with my mom about how he couldn't take my little brother trick-or-treating, because blah blah blah, reason really being he would rather be with his friends. My mom is driving home from work. My dad does not live with us. I'm at the house and my mom is briefing me on why he's being a sheethead via home phone. My dad calls shortly after I hang up with her and tries to defend himself, saying that he'll always love me, no matter how much our mom pushes him away, and she has every right to. TLDR, he's a raving narcissist, like he's pleading to the court. I'm very confused as to why I'm being dragged into this, so I just calmly go yep, MHM, I know. Whenever he talked, called my mom back and told her what's up. He called again, and I didn't answer. He called several times, wasn't having it. Couple trick-or-treaters later, I get a call again from my mom. We start to talk, but then I get another knock at the door. My dad. I hang up the phone. He pulls me outside and begins to repeat his points again, yelling and scolding me for things my mother did, digging up years of old bullshit and angst that I had nothing to do with. He starts talking about he doesn't get anything from us. I want to defend myself, but I'm crying too hard to. He's like stomping on the ground and talking 2 octaves above his regular tone at this point. Outside, where trick-or-treaters can see. Yeah, I'm in tears, and he has the gall to make me hug him. I sit down on the couch only for a moment before the police show up at my door. I didn't talk to my dad for months after that. Buried, but whatever. I got hired as seasonal for Toys R Us, being mostly parents buying stuff for kids. 99.99% of the people I encountered were polite, despite being swarmed with questions, and helping 6 people at once being a daily reality. If I wasn't stocking, I was put in electronics, where they sell the kid-friendly headphones, most of the child-oriented tablets, actual honest-to-God tablets, and, obviously, the video games. Since the guy in charge was there for a longest time, he mostly handled sales himself. I just handled phone calls, stocking, and locking the security glass to consoles and new release games, and making sure people didn't try to run off with consoles and MP3 players. So I'm on the phone with a customer. I think they were asking about the Lego Batman game, when all of a sudden, I hear this screaming. I ask them to hold, and I look to my left. Guy who was in that physical range of might be 40 something, might be 50 something is blowing the fuck up at my coworker in front of one of the guys they pull from ours to help out seasonal. Like, cursing, screaming, shoving a finger into my coworker's stoic face. My coworker is a type who always looks sleepy, which, combined with standing at ease military style, amused me on some level that I can't explain. This guy is screaming top of his lungs about bad customer service, and how if he was working at his factory, he'd be walking down the street with a check in his hand, over and over, and how he worked hard. The worst part is that his 16-year-old son is standing there, eyes firmly on the ground, looking so fucking ashamed, like a parent who's just given up on their 10-year-old smashing up the store and screaming bloody murder. Eventually, his fury turns to the guy from ours, screaming that he wants his as written up and a talking to. Finally, he purchases the game he was after. Borderlands, the pre-sequel. Literally just that. According to my coworker and my boss, it turned out someone from the morning shift put it in one of the drawers and forgot it was pre-ordered. You're supposed to keep them somewhere easy to find if they are on hold. And when my coworker didn't have telepathy, this guy blew the fuck up because he thought he rolled his eyes at him. I remember I have a phone in my hand, and the woman on the other end heard the entire thing and was, thankfully, extremely understanding that I'd take a little longer due to angry middle-aged man having a screaming tantrum. I get sent on my lunch break right after, and the guy from ours and my coworker is there. We all decide this is my coworkers talking to and laugh. Me. So it says here that you guys went to the emergency department earlier today and that they diagnosed him with a cold and told you to go home. Patient's mom. Yes. Me. When did the symptoms start? Mom. This morning. He had a runny nose. Me. Checks kid out. So he's had a runny nose for about 6 hours. No fever. No cough. He's eating and drinking. Well. He's voiding well. He's happy and playful and acting like himself. No vomiting or diarrhea. No rashes. Vaccinated. No recent travel. He's in daycare and siblings are sick at home with similar symptoms. And you took him to the ed and they said he had a cold. And after you left you decided to bring him here for a second opinion. Or, Mom, well I also wanted to get an antibiotic in case his symptoms get worse. Me. You want me to prescribe an antibiotic for a mild viral infection in case it suddenly becomes a bacterial illness that needs antibiotics and no follow-up. Mom. Right. Me. Yeah. I'm not going to do that. Mom. Starts crying and hyperventilating. What do you mean? Why don't you want to help my child? He needs an antibiotic. You're killing him. Kicks chair. Screams louder. Me. Is this the real life? This happened during Christmas. I manage a photo studio that runs by appointment only. We don't do walk-ins because we always want to give our customers a full half hour in the camera rooms and give them a better experience than try to squish as many customers in a day. Like another now dead corporation portraits I used to work at. Customer checked in 17 minutes late for his session. I informed him he still had 15 minutes available for a shoot. He instantly became livid with me. He argued with me about pushing the appointments after him later and said he called and left a message. I apologized that I hadn't had a chance to check the messages yet as we've been booked solid since we opened at 8 AM and said I'm still happy to offer him a photo shoot personally shot by me in 15 minutes where I can assure him 40 photos to choose from with lots of variety. He didn't care. He argued and insulted us. Well, if this is how you run a business, no wonder blah blah blah. I continued to offer him some time in the room. He asked for the corporate number and I gave it to him. He asked for my name personally. I only gave him my first name. He insisted on my full, but I wouldn't give it and asked if there was another smarter manager he could speak with. I told him no, I'm the manager at this location and that I'm sorry he hit traffic and had trouble parking, but if he would allow me to start shooting, that I could at least let him have something. He refused because his wife was still parking and started at me again. It went back and forth like this for about 10 minutes. He called his wife who was still parking and complained to her as well. He was loud and rude and short with me. Kept asking why the other customers couldn't be pushed back 15 minutes like in a doctor's office. I told him that we'd have to do that for every customer following them for the rest of the day due to accommodate him, and there was no way we would do that as these customers were promised the times they booked. I did my best to smile through it, but was very firm with him that I'm not going to punish other customers and take their time away in the camera room just because he unfortunately hit traffic. He left and I wished him a happy holiday. He replied, "You can shove your happy holiday up," and walked out. Throughout this 20-minute tirade, customers stopped paying attention to their own sales and sessions and just started watching this guy in awe. After he left, the customer patiently waiting behind him told me I was a saint and that she would have punched him if it were her. Update: he called back to complain further. He told me that it was unacceptable the way our policy worked and that they were still trying to find parking. I apologized again and even told him that we left him a confirmation call warning about the traffic in the mall 2 days ago. He replied again that he left us a message saying he was going to be late. I told him I apologize, that we didn't have moment to check the messages as we were with other customers. He told me that he didn't appreciate the way I spoke to him in front of his kids, and I told him that I didn't appreciate the rude way that he spoke to me either. He tried again to berate me for not swaying with the policy, and as I tried to reply he started yelling over me until I asked him to please let me finish my sentence. As I explained to him that the customers that were after him were already here and checked and that I couldn't take away from them because of his unfortunate circumstances, he replied, oh, obviously they are better than us because they had checked in already. No, sir, that is not what I meant. Only that they are not responsible for your circumstances and they are here for their promised camera room time. He said he was upset I didn't even offer him another time or squeezed him in somewhere. I told him that I did, but he wouldn't hear it because the camera room was booked from that moment, 11:30 am, until at least 5 pm. I offered to shoot just the boys and reschedule him another time for the whole family or just reschedule you for a different day. He then started insulting me and the business again, swearing up and down that he's going to complain about me and have my job. Started asking where our other locations are. Weird. I told him he is welcome to do what he thinks and right, and wished a happy holiday. In recounting this story to my boss, the owner, my boss said that he can't wait for this asshole to call because he had a bad day and would love to take it out on someone who deserves it. Was in the Boy Scouts, only about 14 or 15 years old. Most people in the program are really nice, but I went to a camporee once, which is a district-wide camp that can have up to 300 boys, sometimes more. The Order of the Arrow is a secret society that is supposed to be rather magical and cool, which it is, but there was this one adult leader. The OA set up on top a hill, and as staff of the camp I start walking down the hill from the OA site. Some kids are walking around and want to walk through the site as a shortcut and to see the OA setup. None of them could have been older than 13. As I pass them, they ask me, can we go up there? Officially, I'm just staff, not OA. I'm now, but not then. So I tell them they have to ask someone up there. As they walk up they meet this one adult and say politely, can we walk through here? To which the adult says, very sternly, no, go away. One of the kids was a smart aleck, so he replies with 2 points from the scout law. Well, you're not courteous, and you're not kind. I'm courteous and kind. He yells as he starts to disprove himself. He later had to be calmed down by my dad of all people as he yelled at an adult leader at the top of his lungs because he drove his Jeep down the camp road a little faster than usual. We need to retrain him. Working as a waiter in a posh steakhouse. Guest state inquires, veal marsala. What is that? So I explain what the dish is and what veal is. She goes nuts, yelling about cruelty to animals. Who would do such a thing? And how would you like it if I did that to you? I was pretty sure a table flip was imminent. My first thought, wow, this poor guy she is with. My second thought, wait, what? Did she just threaten me? By this time my GM had come over and was trying to talk her off a ledge. The lady, and I use that term in the broadest definition possible, decided they were done and leaving. As she stops in the middle of my station, she turns to me and says, well, why don't you call it that on the menu? My reply, because dead baby cow marsala doesn't really move on the menu, ma'am. She went full on apoplectic, sputtering, couldn't speak. Hell, she might have turned purple, but I couldn't tell because it's pretty damn dark inside the restaurant, but you could hear the chuckles and giggles from the nearby tables. After my GM walked them, we had a chat. GM, that was pretty funny. Me, yeah, I know. GM, but it was really uncalled for. Me, yeah, I know. GM, gonna have to suspend you for 2 shifts. Me, yeah, I know. GM, still though, was pretty damn funny. Change your clothes. Tell Ron to put a draft on my tab. Enjoy the beer and I'll see ya in 2 days. I'm a little late to the party, but I just had to tell this story. My late wife's mother was, and remains, completely insane. I cannot even begin to explain the entity. This is not the craziest thing she has ever done, but it was the moment I realized the scope of what I was dealing with for a future mother-in-law. It was almost Christmas many years ago, when I had only been with my then girlfriend for maybe a year or 2. Her mother, let's call her Judith, had gathered some gifts for donation from her church or something, and the same day had purchased herself some new shoes. More on that later. Judith was having one of her daily mild tantrums and claimed she felt overwhelmed. Well, my wife volunteered to wrap the gifts and bring them to the neighbor's house that was taking all the wrapped presents in the neighborhood. No big deal so far. We sit down and wrap all the Barbies and such and promptly take them to the neighbors. When we get back to my wife's place, Judith comes storming out of her room. I mean stomping like a faking bull. She is in tears when she screamed at my wife, "Where are my shoes?" We of course had no idea. Judith keeps ranting and raving, full waterworks and red face. She accuses my wife and me of wrapping them up and donating them with the rest of the toys and such. We did not. Judith gets into this cycle of hysterically yelling, "You gave them away. You wrapped them up and gave them away." I mean, I know money was tight, but holy hell, if they were donated, would that have been the end of the world? She eventually found them up in her disaster of a room. She is a hoarder, right by her bed, where she had tried them on earlier. The main reason why this stuck out to me so much is that I vaguely remember having a much smaller tantrum of this kind about my shoes being missing and blaming my parents who had just cleaned when I was too young to have much memory, maybe 3 or 4. This woman was in her 50s at the time. Probably the worst part about it is that afterwards, my wife couldn't figure out why I was so baffled. I had to explain that this was not normal behavior. This happened 13 days ago. I was at the train station, about to catch the train to see Guns N' Roses in concert. It was in the middle of a 12-day 45+C heatwave, so my friend and I line up at the vending machine to get a bottle of water. There's already 2 women using the machine, so we stand maybe 1 meter back to let them finish up. A drunk bogan just walks up and sidesteps in front of me, squishing into the little room there was between myself and the women who were just retrieving their item. My friend just said, "We're in line here, mate," and the bogan lost his faking mind. His first response, instantly screaming at the top of his lungs, "Calm THRHE, fact down." How the fuck am I supposed to know there's a faking line? There's people everywhere. So my friend just tells him to calm down. We were clearly in line. "Just wait your turn," and he stepped back in front of him and got his water bottle. The whole time my friend was getting the water bottle, this dipshit is just standing there screaming. All you had to do was tell me there was a line. Why won't you let it go? Stop having a crack. Let it go. How the fuck was I supposed to know? Who the fuck do you think you are? You should have just said there was a line. Just let it go. Stop picking at it. What's to a problem to the point where other people on the platform are telling him to shut the fuck up and let it go, as my mate clearly wasn't engaging. After like a minute of non-stop ranting at our backs, we walk off and he yells out again, calling my mate a coward, and he called me a beach. This was all because he cut in front of us in line. I was in charge of a store when I was 19 in the middle of summer, and it was really busy. I had a line of perhaps 7 customers when a large man bursts into the shop and starts shouting at me. The tills are right by the door, so the entire shop was listening to his tirade. He was screaming at the fact he's bought clothes for his grandson, and on the receipt was something called a girl's feather. He said we'd sold him something he didn't want. The item was around £3, maybe $4.5. He is shouting the place down as the fact our salespeople have stolen from him, and he only bought boys' clothes, and how dare we treat people this way. Of course he didn't have what he bought with him in true asshole customer style, but produced the receipt. I got someone to take over the tills, and with the entire shop watching, I took him to collect what he bought to see what the till had it registered as. Anyone working in retail will tell you, receipts can be funny buggers when it comes to what things are called. He picks out a few items, and I check their names on the till. I've no idea why, but the small blue boy's cardigan came up as girl's feather on the till. When I told him about this, he grabbed the receipt and stormed out the store. No, he didn't check his bag for extra items. No, he didn't see any item that he didn't buy, but thought he was in the right to burst into the store and accuse us of cheating him and stealing his money because the receipt described something random, and screamed at someone who was only trying to help him. I loved working in retail. I was a bartender in a small Irish pub. Nothing special, just a bar and some regulars. We did have a coffee machine though, an old hand-me-down from one of our big sister pubs that got an upgrade. One night I had a woman in her late 40s come in and order a coffee. Our machine was out of order that day, so I told her we're sorry, but we can't make any today. However, she was welcome to go to the coffee lounge 2 doors down, who make much better coffee, and bring it back here to sit with her friends. She demanded I make her a coffee. I told her I couldn't, and she demanded again. This went around for a couple of minutes until she started screaming, yelling insults, trying to grab me over the bar, the whole shebang. My manager ran and hid while I told her she had to leave and wouldn't be served anymore or I would call the police. She kept screaming, so I called the police. She waited until I hung up, calmly said something to me and walked out. She went over to Hungry Jack's, Burger King for anyone not Aussie, and bought a coffee there. Came back and started bashing on the window, holding the coffee up and pointing at it, screaming at me about how she got anyone you motherfucker. She was very surprised when 2 police grabbed her arms and arrested her from behind. I have had meth heads more calm than her. People. Adult temper, road rage as a result. While driving, I changed lanes using the designated lane to pass someone whose car had a tire blowout and quickly got back in my lane. However, the lane I used to pass had someone going extremely fast in it and they had to slow down while I went around the car having issues. It was either change lanes and pass or be a part of an accident. The person which I had passed matched my speed and drove next to me with their window down yelling at me, so I rolled my window up and ignored them. I guess that angered him, so he sped up, put his blinker on, and got in front of me, so I kept my distance. I did not fully expect him to slam on his brakes, but he did. I did not expect him to park and get out of his car to yell at me in heavy traffic that was going 60 miles per hour, but he did. He stood outside of my car screaming about how stupid I was to use his lane to pass. Meanwhile, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the car that had a blown out tire on the side of the road, and I just looked at the guy outside my window wondering what his problem was. I actually didn't react to him until he started threatening harm to my vehicle and myself, so then I called the cops and reported him. This was the only person on the road acting erratically. Other people drove by honking and yelling for him to get back in his car. When I showed him that I called 911 and was talking to someone on my phone, he ran to his car and squealed away. It still makes me sick thinking about it. I worked for a publishing house which published several kinds of magazines. This isn't a tantrum story quite like the other stories, but anyway. One late Friday a woman was bussed through 2 of the outer doors and then let into the office after she told whoever was opening the door that she was there to meet person Y of music magazine Z, who was not in anymore, but person X of said magazine was. She looked sensible, dressed in a mildly rockish way, and seemed to know the people she mentioned, so all seemed to check out. Person X came, told her they didn't have an appointment, nor remembered her from anywhere, but would hear her out. She said some incoherent sentences, incoherent as in not making much sense, and then asked for some water. They left for the kitchen area, and she left her purse/bag to one of the tables on the open office area. Heated discussion was heard from the kitchen for about 5 or so minutes. Apparently she accused someone of stealing her things, among other things. Then she started screaming full blast, again quite incoherently. They came back to the office area where she proceeded to take out stacks and stacks of printed A4s out of her bag and throw them at person X and all over the office. There were just few of us there, so it was a bit uneasy. Eventually we had to call security, who proceeded to half carry her out after she screamed all kinds of profanity and weird shit about us stealing her evidence, the papers she threw around, and otherwise making her life miserable. We were left with 3 to 4 centimeter stack, over half an inch I guess, of printouts of her own emails, some of which were sent by her to herself, and most of them had some scribbles on them. She blamed a semi-famous good-looking rock star or something. We never figured out what, but it had escalated to all-encompassing conspiracy, and now our music magazine Z and its editor-in-chief and other main staff were also part of it. We got emails for months, cold been years, People started filtering them, which she sent to embassies, Europol, local police, special task forces, FBI and who knows where else. Some of these emails were to said recipients and some to herself, which she just to everyone anyway with her deep insides added. It was scary to go to the office for months after that. For 3 abysmal summers I worked as a lifeguard and water safety instructor at the municipal pool. I have a lot of horror stories about patrons, the vast majority of them being adults and parents of the swim lesson kids. But the worst involved this older lady who would come to the pool every day. She always wore orange Crocs and a hiking hat with a neck flap into the pool, even though we had reminded her many times of our no street clothes policy. She would stay there pretty much from open till close, just treading water from one end to the other, usually in the deep end. For context, our deep end was just a small corner of the pool that was deeper than the rest, which made it the kids' favorite place to jump in and play. Even though the other side of the pool was more than deep enough for the lady, we'll call her Annie, to tread water all the way across, she insisted on using the 9 feet deep end. So one day Annie is doing her thing when a group of kids who come regularly start playing in the deep end, jumping in and doing tricks and stuff. The kids are all about 6 to 9 years old. I happen to know one of these kids is mildly autistic, small town, and we'll call him Brandon. Brandon and his friends kept playing, while Annie got increasingly annoyed that her deep end was being intruded upon. She snapped at the kids several times to stop splashing. The splashes were made by them jumping into the water. The kids mostly ignored her, and Annie starts getting huffy and complaining out loud to me, the nearest lifeguard. I shrugged and said they're not breaking any rules, and suggested she use the other unoccupied end of the pool. So she treads over to the ladder, which the kids have been using to get out of the pool. But Brandon swims over in front of her and starts heading for the ladder. So Annie grabs his arm and says, "You wait your turn, you little sh." So I say we have a strict no vulgarity policy at the pool, and she gets even angrier, yelling at the kids to go somewhere else, blocking the ladder, and not letting the autistic kid climb out. He's getting visibly upset, so his mom comes over and starts chastising the woman, saying he's a kid and he's autistic, and she should know better, etc. Annie starts yelling and getting all red in the face, until our manager comes over and asks her to leave. She refuses, and since our management is a joke, she just treads at the other end and beaches at the lifeguards for the rest of the day. TLDR, an older woman yelled at an autistic boy and called him names because he and his friends were also using the public pool.